Conquest manual in another world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301, Choose One. At this moment, on the cliff, looking up at the falling raindrops, everyone's expression was extremely strange. Of course there was joy. After all, after working so hard for such a long time, they finally found out that their theoretical judgment was actually correct. The cliff was indeed the exit of the Y particles. The discovery of the exit can mean that the location of the underground palace has been determined. This is undoubtedly a phased discovery with great value. And along with the joy, there was a strong desire to complain. It was clearly said that the underground palace would go to the sky? Who would only look at the ground when seeing that book? Old Zhang is really not a kind person. Of course. After all, there is more joy, especially after the initial drop. Everyone felt a sense of surprise that they saw the dawn in the darkness. Then Wei Fan took action again, flying around the cliff with his sword, and finally determined that the winter rain containing Y particles did indeed only fall in the area where the cliff was located. The area is about 1,000 square meters. Just as everyone was pleasantly surprised, Lin Ziming suddenly heard a sigh. He looked over and saw that Taoist Wang was looking at the sky with a complicated expression, letting the cold winter rain with Y particles hit his face. His eyes were red, and it was hard to tell whether it was rain or tears. He hurriedly asked, "Master Wang, what are you doing?" Master Wang exhaled a long breath and said, "Colonel Lin, do you remember something I told you before?" "What thing?" "The story of our master coming to Qingcheng Mountain to look for the underground palace." Lin Ziming was stunned at first, then reacted, "Master Zhang's Hishan." Master Wang nodded and said, "Our master explored Qingcheng Mountain for a long time. Before leaving, he came to the edge of the cliff, sat and looked up at the sky, and finally left with a sigh. At that time, everyone, including me, thought that our master had found nothing, but now it seems." Hearing this, Lin Ziming was suddenly shocked. "Master, do you mean that Master Zhang's Hishan discovered the underground palace at that time?" Master Wang was silent for a while. "Maybe so, or it may be the imagination of a younger generation like me. The ancestors are gone, and no matter how much speculation there is, it is groundless." Lin Ziming couldn't help but look up at the sky, and said with some regret, "It's a pity that Taoist Zhang has passed away. Otherwise in this great world, perhaps he can go further than us." Then he comforted Taoist Wang for a few more words, nodded and said goodbye, and found Li Bayan, Academician Li. "Now that the location of the Y particle has been determined, what should we do next?" Li Bayan thought for a while and said, "Colonel Lin, the location of the underground palace is obviously above our heads, but where it is, how far away it is from us, and whether we can go in, these are all information that still needs to be detected. So what we have to do next is to locate the location of the underground palace and explore why the winter rain with Y particles only falls near the cliff. But at this point, I think it's not appropriate to call it the underground palace, so let's just call it the heavenly palace." Lin Ziming nodded and agreed with the statement, and then asked curiously, "Academician Li, where do you think the heavenly palace will be in the sky?" Li Bayan looked at the sky and said, "Either in the near space or in the alien space. There are only these two possibilities. Students who have studied geography should know this. The atmosphere is close to the ground, and from the ground to the top of the atmosphere, it is divided into many areas such as the stratosphere and troposphere. At present, the understanding of most layers by various countries on the Earth has reached a relatively thorough level, but a few words should be added after this sentence, except for near space. The concept of near space was mentioned once before in the Great Mo world, when the rabbits first tried to launch a near-space probe. Its alias is also called the unknown layer, with an altitude of 40 kilometers to 100 kilometers, which is both too high and too low. It is too high because the air there is extremely thin and airplanes cannot fly. Even a meteorologist's sounding balloons cannot cross the threshold of 40 kilometers above sea level. It is too low because the air there is too dense for satellites. The clamping of friction will cause the satellite to fall into the lower atmosphere in an irreversible way within a few weeks, wasting precious materials worth hundreds of millions of yuan in vain. By the way, this is the layer where Mr. Jin's trajectory went. Some amateur scientists even firmly believe that there are atmospheric creatures in this area, similar to the Lightning Man in Ultraman Tiga. If the full score of this area is 100 points, The current level of science and technology's understanding of it is about 7 points. Don't think I'm kidding, this score is not exaggerated at all. At present, the only panacea value we can apply to the unknown layer is 10e4 Pa, and in order to get this number, it has cost no less than 2 billion yuan. As for the alien space, it can also be called the alien domain, and it is called a copy in the game. Alien space and unknown layer. The two are the only possible places where Xiangong exists. It is actually very easy to confirm its location, just go up against the rain with Y particles. The size of Y particles can be captured by the induction network. In addition, Wei Fan can also make a humanoid self-propelled detector, which is not difficult to operate. Of course, the time is definitely not now. First of all, Li Baoyan and his team only brought professional detection equipment. It is okay to fly a helicopter for 5 or 6 kilometers, but they must launch a detector to go up, and they don't have such technical reserves. Secondly, Wang Qiang estimated the total amount of nitrogen that disappeared. According to her research results on the Earth vein flame in the Great Mo realm, the total volume of Y particles produced was calculated. In the end, it was discovered that this rain might not last long. If you rashly go up to the sky, the rain may stop halfway through the flight. Therefore, today's detection came to an end for the time being. Lin Ziming reported the situation to the core layer again and sought off-site support. After a while, the core layer replied, "A new batch of personnel will depart from the Xicheng satellite base immediately and will arrive at the scene within 20 hours. There is no way. The country is so powerful." After ending the communication, Lin Ziming found Wang Daocheng and handed over the issue of the new batch of personnel to him. Although it is not an excavator that will come tomorrow, after all, a detector will be launched. And the formation will not be small. Li Baoyan took Wang Qiang with him during this gap to continue studying the structure of the cliff. Although it is currently confirmed that the sky exists in the sky, there are still many mysteries waiting to be solved near the cliff. For example, why does the winter rain only fall in this area? Is it an accident caused by the location, or is there something special? For example, although the Xiangong has been confirmed, is there really nothing else under the mountain? At noon the next day, a new batch of foreign aid arrived. Compared with the size of Li Baoyan's group of 7 or 8 people, the second group of foreign aid has a much larger number of people, more than 20. Xicheng Satellite Launch Center happens to be located in Sichuan Province. China's first geosynchronous orbit satellite, the first communication and broadcasting satellite, Chang'e 3 and Xianlian all came from here. To some extent, in certain periods of time, their confidentiality level will not be much lower than that of the Great Mo realm. Since the mission is performed by a probe rather than an airship or even a rocket, although the launch pad is not small in size, it still took less than half a day to build it. Another night passed. At 5 o'clock in the morning of the next day, the rabbits will release a large amount of unmarked nitrogen that they have prepared into this area, hoping to increase the generation of Y particles. Although some nitrogen has drifted out of the cliff area due to wind disturbance, about 40% of the nitrogen still remains here. At the same time, 5 probes were launched in advance. Their targets are 5 altitudes: 3,000 meters, 10,000 meters, 30,000 meters, 50,000 meters and 100,000 meters. According to the plan, the detector will take the induction network to perform the task first. If it fails this time, Wei Fan will be arranged to ascend to heaven. Why does this sentence feel a bit weird? Note, let's add a smaller game. If you think Xiangong is in a different space, hit 1, and if it is in a nearby space, hit 2. Chapter 302 Locking the Heavenly Palace. Note, I didn't expect so many people to choose the near space option for the easy point question. Considering that the Y particle only appeared a few minutes before and after, it is difficult to lock on to a specific area. Therefore, after repeated arguments, the rabbits decided to launch the detector in advance and wait directly in the sky. As mentioned before, the 5 altitudes are 3,000 meters, 10,000 meters, 30,000 meters, 50,000 meters and 100,000 meters. The first 3 are easy, and the biggest difficulty lies in the 50,000 and 100,000 altitudes. The information currently available in this near space is relatively limited, and the laminar flow characteristics are extremely complex, so it is a big test for both launch and detection technology. Fortunately, the rabbits do not need to fix the detector in the near space for a long time, and it will only take about 2 hours at most. This is barely good news, which reduces the difficulty by several orders of magnitude. At this moment, Li Baoyan and Lin Ziming are standing next to the simple launch pad. Listening to the introduction of Wang Hui, the general siege lion of a core project from the Xicheng Satellite Launch Center, according to the statistical results of academician Li's team. 2 days ago, the time when the Y particles appeared was about 6:03 in the morning, and yesterday it was 6:05. Therefore, we judged through the model provided by Comrade Zhao Wang that the time when the Shanghai emitted Y particles was about 5:55. The changes after the Y particles are scattered are determined by the weather. Sometimes they intersect with cold and warm convection, forming rain with Y particles. Sometimes they will gather into evil spirits and fall. So we plan to launch detectors at 5:05, with 3 at each height, and a total of 15 at 5 locations. Each detector is equipped with 4 small omnidirectional expansion platforms, and the already laid induction network will be deployed at that time. You can imagine a ball flying to a certain height and standing still, and then a canvas of about 20 square meters is unfolded in front, behind, left and right. There are 3 detectors at each height for complementary detection. In this case, there is basically no possibility of Y particles escaping. Lin Ziming nodded and asked, "What about confidentiality? Will it be photographed by other satellites flying over us?" Wang Hui smiled and explained, "Colonel Lin, don't worry about this. The Eagle's military optical remote sensing satellite with the highest resolution is the Keyhole series. The main force in service is KH-12, with a maximum resolution of 0.1 meters. But although they have high accuracy, they are not staring at our HUDs all the time. They fly over Qingchang Mountain every day at 13 hours, 19 minutes, and 27 seconds 52 noon, which is much earlier than now. In addition, the forests of Qingchang Mountain are natural cover. As we pack up the equipment immediately after we finish the work, they can't find any abnormalities. And the higher the resolution of the satellite, the smaller its width will be. It's like looking at the Earth with a straw. It's actually very difficult to find something." Wang Qiang on the side thought about it and asked curiously, "Engineer Wang, since other people's satellites are impossible, is there a possibility that our own satellites can be cracked and invaded?" The question asked by this girl is actually very normal. Many people in life have more or less had such questions. Wang Hui is also a very kind old man. He should be happy to explain this kind of problem to these non-professionals. However, what is surprising is that after hearing Wang Qiang's words, all the scientific researchers from the Xicheng Satellite Launch Center, including Wang Hui, almost all looked solemn at the same time. They were not angry, but it seemed that they had touched a very sensitive node. A few seconds later, Wang Hui took a deep breath and said to her solemnly, "Comrade Zhao Wang, it is not 15 years ago now. The country's confidentiality technology in the field of aerospace is no longer as weak as before. I can assure you that this kind of thing will never happen to us again." Lin Ziming looked at Wang Hui thoughtfully after hearing this. He noticed one of the words, again. Perhaps Wang Qiang's question triggered a long line of memory in Wang Hui. The old engineer in his 50s took advantage of the time and slowly began to tell a story. Students who have been to kindergarten should know. There is a word in China called repaying kindness. This can be said to be a virtue or a morality. After the founding of New China, it was originally poor and blank. The current happy life can be said to be inseparable from the top scientific researchers who gave up the superior conditions abroad and resolutely went to the motherland in the early days of the founding of the People's Republic of China. For example, Mr. Jin, Mr. Deng, Mr. Li and others. They knew that China had raised them and given them opportunities. Therefore, when the country needed them most, they came back to repay the kindness of raising them. The corresponding word for repaying kindness is to repay enmity. Some people received the best education in the country, and the country spent a lot of effort to cultivate them. As a result, they chose to run to foreign countries and even attack China in turn. There may be no punishment in law, but it will be despised. There is such a person in the history of Chinese satellites, who is destined to be nailed to the pillar of shame. Her name is Gao Xingxin, and she can be said to be one of the most conscienceless people in China since the founding of the People's Republic of China. Gao Xingxin is a native Chinese, and her father is an official in the system. She has had an extraordinary IQ since she was a child, and her grades are extremely excellent. She studied in the Precision Instrument Department of Shumu in college. After getting her master's degree, she went to the Department of Electrical Engineering at Stanford University to pursue a doctorate. First of all, it is worth mentioning that she is really good in the field of satellite navigation. In October 2005, the Europeans launched the first experimental satellite of the Galileo system, and the signal of the satellite was activated in January 2006. In just a few hours, Guzingson and other staff in the laboratory cracked and captured new civilian signals on 3 bands. Then her show operation came. In April 2007, China launched the first medium Earth orbit satellite of the Beta 1 system. At that time, Guzingson demodulated the 3-band frequencies of all civilian code broadcasts on this M1 satellite, and cracked its code generator as a linear shift feedback register. At the same time, she also gave all these achievements to the Eagle, and was commended by the Eagle Aviation Radio Committee for this. And successfully obtained a green card. The day of receiving the commendation was August 25th, when you see this chapter. How shameless. But the only thing to be thankful for is that she only cracked the civilian code pseudocode. If it was a military code, China's losses would have been even worse in the disaster a year later. But even if it was a pseudocode, the losses it brought to the rabbits were more than 10 digits. For example, the construction of Bison was delayed until 2009, and it was finally successful in 2018. Under normal circumstances, Bison should have been officially opened in December 2007. Later, her father was dismissed in 2010, and she herself was not allowed to return to China for life. Of course. Now this person is reaping what she has sown. Although she is still a professor, the entire research group is full of ASAN. There was also a situation where no one signed up for classes for 3 consecutive months. Attached is the list of Stanford research groups. All of them are ASAN Web Stanford EDU Grisegeo students HTML, but no matter what this person's fate is now, she did bring shame to China's satellite industry. Even if it is just a civilian code or pseudocode, it is unacceptable to the rabbits. And the research and development and launch base of the cracked satellite was the Xicheng Satellite Launch Center. Wang Hui, who was in his 40s at the time, was one of the core members of the project team. That day, the news stabbed everyone's heart like a sharp knife. Although the country did not take any punitive measures against them, almost everyone held their breath. For example, Wang Hui deliberately framed the cracked civil code in his study as a warning for life. Now 13 years have passed, Wang Hui's temples have begun to turn white, and his body has become more hunched. But his heart is more majestic than before, and he has supported a piece of sky in an unknown niche field. As he said to Wang Qiang, now he can guarantee that no one can crack our satellite again. Even the civil code pseudocode is not allowed. What provides strong evidence for his guarantee is that since then, none of the 43 Beta satellites launched by the Xicheng Satellite Launch Center have cracked an E-code. Guzingsen's failure began on a Beta satellite in February 2009. At that time, the team code-named X, which brought together top scientific researchers, failed after 13 days of cracking and disbanded on the spot. The site returned to the launch site. The launch site of the probe was set at an open flat area below the cliff, and the area of the launch platform was only about 50 square meters. At an altitude of 100,000 meters, even a launch vehicle like the Kuaizhou is not needed. A booster of more than 2 meters can completely handle it. If a Kuaizhou is needed, the launch site cannot be arranged at Qingchang Mountain. Wang Hui personally sat at the operation console for this launch mission and gave orders. 5 minutes later, everything was ready. Count down 3 numbers, 3, 2, 1, launch, rumble. The boosters for the 30,000, 50,000 and 100,000 meter altitudes took off one after another and disappeared rapidly. For the remaining 3,000 and 10,000 meter altitudes, only helicopter assistance is needed. The maximum flight altitude of the modified Z-18 can reach 9,000 meters, and it is not too easy for the probe to fly by itself for the remaining 1,000 meters. The white booster with the probe gradually disappeared into the air, while the main console on the ground recorded the positions in real time and in detail. The booster has reached an altitude of 30,000 meters. The probe has been separated successfully. The high pressure is 1.17 kilopascal. The temperature is -46.3 degrees. The equipment is normal. The expansion platform has been deployed, and the real-time dynamic signal has been received. The booster has reached an altitude of 50,000 meters. The probe has been separated successfully. The helicopter has reached the 3,000-meter area and successfully released the probe. 100,000-meter altitude. The last message came from the 10,000-meter area. The probe has been lifted off to an altitude of 10,000 meters. The high pressure is 26.4 kilopascal. The temperature is minus 57.5 degrees. The equipment is normal. The expansion platform has been deployed, and the real-time dynamic signal has been received. Looking at the 15 buses in the 5 areas displayed on the main console, Wang Hui, Li Baoyan and others breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Now that all the scientific and technological means in the near-Earth area have been used, the rest depends on the specific location of Xiangguang. While there was still some time, Lin Ziming casually found a topic and asked Li Baoyan, "Academician Li, where do you think the Heavenly Palace is more likely to appear? Nearby space or alien space?" Li Baoyan thought carefully and said, "I personally think the possibility of alien space is more likely." Lin Ziming asked curiously, "Why?" Li Baoyan looked at the sky. His eyes seemed to penetrate the clouds and lock onto the Heavenly Palace, "because I think that with Zhang Daoling's ability, he can't fix a Heavenly Palace in the sky for more than 2,000 years. Unless the records of Qingchang Mountain are wrong, the underground palace was not built by him, but was left by his predecessors, Zhang Daoling, formerly known as Zhang Ling. He was a native of Feng County in the Eastern Han Dynasty and the founder of the 5 Pecks of Rice sect, so he was named Zhang Xianqi. He was born in the 10th year of Jian Wu in the Han Dynasty, which was more than 30 years ago. It is said that he passed away at the age of 122. Now that it has been confirmed that there is a heavenly palace in Qingchang Mountain that can emit spiritual energy and Yi particles, the rabbits are basically sure that Zhang Xianqi is indeed a practitioner, and he can undoubtedly be called a Xianqi in the ancient context. But on the other hand, although it is very long ago, nearly 2,000 years ago, more than 30 years ago, but the rabbits can be sure that there was absolutely no spiritual energy in China during that period of time, or there was no large-scale spiritual environment. After all, there are countless documents from the Eastern Han Dynasty obtained by archaeology, but there are very few official records of immortals, and most of them are recorded by ordinary people. Moreover, if that were the case, the 3 kingdoms at the end of the Han Dynasty would not be an ordinary chaotic world. Instead, it should be called the mythical version of the 3 kingdoms, the kind where Lu Bu could break Huliao Pass with one punch, and by the way, he could plant a wild grass in front of Dong Zhou's grave. Therefore, if nothing unexpected happens, there must be very few areas with spiritual energy at the end of the Han Dynasty. Zhang Daoling's situation is probably a bit like the protagonist of the current urban immortal cultivation novels. He is the only one in that era, or at most a few practitioners. He may have obtained some kind of inheritance, or discovered some blessed land, and thus embarked on the path of cultivation. Considering the poor spiritual environment of the local area and the years since Zhang Daoling's death, the rabbits estimated that the realm of Zhang Xianqi was likely to fluctuate around the Jinden stage. Of course, this is just a guess. Because now with the discovery of the Heavenly Palace, the mysteries of the local area are not much less than those of the Great Mo realm. For example, did the local area really have a great world of cultivation thousands of years ago? Are those ancient myths and legends actually all-powerful practitioners? But if that great world existed, why are there no texts or relics left? But in general, now that science has analyzed some of the mysteries of cultivation, the rabbits can already face these myths and legends relatively squarely. Even if they exist, they are nothing more than relatively powerful practitioners. They are human beings, not gods. In a sense, this explanation is easier to accept than those natural immortals who talk about gods and gods. The topic returns to Zhang Daoling. Although everything is still speculation at present. But if Zhang Daoling's realm is really just around the Jinden stage, then he basically does not have the ability to make a heavenly palace float in the air for 2,000 years. Even if he had some talismans, he would never be able to do it. Mo Pidong's 3rd-level cloud-hiding talisman only lasted for 100 years, not to mention that the talisman would expire much faster in the homeland. A talisman of 100 years in the Great Mo realm would be good enough to be effective for 30 years in the homeland. Although the scale of the underground palace is still unclear, according to conventional ideas, it is still several hundred square meters like an ordinary temple. If it exists in the near space, it means that it has at least 2 abilities, floating and invisible. It would be okay for a while, but can it last for more than 2,000 years? To be honest, if there is such spiritual energy, the Earth can fly to Betelgeuse to poke Orion's kidney. But the alien space is different. Even if there is a dead object in the alien space, you can put it in it and it can float for a long time, because it is an independent space at all. Of course, it is not ruled out that Zhang Daoling has found something similar to a psychic generator that can keep beeping like Luo Zixiang. But this may be much smaller than the alien space. Therefore, Li Baoyan's guess is still relatively realistic, although the difficulty of opening an alien space may be much higher than that of a nearby space. Just as Lin Ziming and Li Baoyan were chatting, Wang Hua's somewhat excited voice suddenly came to his ears. Colonel Lin, A2 has feedback. Lin Ziming and Li Baoyan looked at each other, and they both rushed to the side of the main console. Engineer Wang, what altitude is A2? Wang Hua pointed to the undulating line at the bottom of the screen and said, the 3,000-meter altitude line. Wow, look, A3 also responded. B1, B2, B3 at 10,000 meters did not respond, which means that the position of Xiangong should be between 3,000 and 10,000 meters. Then he said to technician Feng Ping, Xiao Feng, pull the position of A1 together, and search upwards with all three devices. The other 10,000-meter group B will descend and lock the area as soon as possible. Understood? Feng Ping typed quickly on the keyboard with both hands. As the technical support of the Long March series, he seemed very calm at this time. Group A is rising in altitude, and Group B is descending. Group A is at an altitude of 3,800 meters and still captured Y particles. Group B descended to 7,600 meters, and the induction network did not respond. AB high in the sky. Each group of 3 detectors formed a huge detection module, which were extremely close to each other but did not interfere with each other. The space station docking level technology was once again demonstrated in this unknown high altitude. 1 up, 1 down. 3 minutes later, Feng Ping's eyes fixed. A high-density Y particles were detected in the 4,323-meter area, but there was no response at 4,324.8 meters. It's confirmed that Xiangong is in a different space. Note, it's the end of the month, please give me some monthly votes. Today is the only update, a 2-in-1 chapter, 5,800 words. In addition, my grandfather will be discharged from the hospital the day after tomorrow, and I will try to update 3 times a day starting on the 28th. Chapter 303 Entrance. The determination of the location of the Xiangong is both exciting and stressful. It is exciting because the Xiangong is located very low, only more than 4,000 meters above the ground. At this height, let alone military aircraft, even civilian helicopters can easily reach it. This is undoubtedly a huge convenience for sampling research. Researchers can carry equipment and take a large helicopter to fly to the sky to collect information. The sampling and detection of the detector seems very convenient, but due to the volume and load problem, many instruments cannot be transported up by the detector. In some special cases, if necessary, let the helicopter fly near the Xiangong, and then Wave Fan will directly take people to fly over. As for the other reason for feeling stressed, it is also very simple, that is, compared with in near space, the difficulty of opening the alien space is much higher. Those who really understand it will understand it. But there is good news. Since the Xiangong can emit Y particles and absorb nitrogen, it can at least be determined that the connection between it and the Earth is definitely not like the light gate, but a kind of split space that the Earth brings. The difficulty of the two is completely different. The former has no chance at all, but the latter can still be rescued. This is like a VN with 3 sets of flash against a 5-piece stone man. As long as he can operate well, he may have a chance to kill him. The sight returns to the ground. At this time, the Y particles have stopped escaping, and the winter rain has stopped falling. However, the imaging equipment of the detector has completed its task before, and all the real-life pictures and thermal images of the lock area have been transmitted back. Facing the profession he is most familiar with, Li Baoyan is leading the team to conduct research quickly. More than half an hour later, he found Lin Ziming and handed over a form. Colonel Lin, the longitude and latitude of Xiangong have been determined: 121 degrees 2529 east longitude, 22 degrees 5420 north latitude, which is about 15 meters in front of us. Lin Ziming took the report handed over by Li Baoyan, glanced at it, and found that he could not understand anything. However, as the person in charge of the scene, he still had to confirm some issues. Academician Li, is your calculation accurate? Will there be any errors? Li Baoyan heard this and smiled confidently. Colonel Lin, don't worry, this result is 100% accurate. Based on the unique aggregation effect of Y particles and thermal imaging images, we have repeatedly compared and calculated, and finally circled this 10.3 square meter core area. Of course, to completely determine the location of the entrance, we still need to go to the sky to see. After all, the detector can only carry a limited number of instruments, and many things cannot be measured. Lin Ziming nodded. No problem, I will contact the air team now. 20 minutes later, a Z-18 took off. The Z-18 is a large general-purpose helicopter developed by us. It is 23 meters long and is the height of a 7-story building when erected. The entire aircraft has a 5-ton external load and a 4-ton internal load. Theoretically, it can accommodate 27 people. Of course, if the passengers are from the Reading Platinum God group, the number of people carrying is estimated to be halved. The Z-18 that Li Baiyan took was a modified Z-18, specially prepared by the Organization for High-Altitude Scientific Research. By reducing the weight of the hanging parts, the internal load and space are made larger. Therefore, for this flight of Li Baiyan, several electronic devices were placed directly in the cabin. What? You ask which mountain scientific research is prepared for? The maximum flight altitude of the Z-18 modification is 9,400 meters. Which mountain are you talking about? As for why military aircraft are used for scientific research tasks, don't ask, the answer is military conversion. Beep beep beep, the helicopter took off very quickly and reached an altitude of more than 4,000 meters in a short while. The normal temperature at an altitude of 4,000 meters is about -9 degrees, which is not a big deal for the northerners. This temperature only requires a set of Hongxing down jackets to handle it. After all, everyone knows the quality of Zhuzhou cotton. After reaching high altitude, Li Baiyan first used an infrared thermometer to detect the temperature at the center of the target area. The core area is -56 degrees. It seems that there are still a lot of Y particles here. Let's measure the central potential field of the area first, and apply a mass model. The density distribution will be calculated according to the mean value, and we will try to locate the exit of the Y particles at the 0.05 meter level. Assistant Zhao Haiming immediately said, "Understood, I will prepare now." A few minutes later, a machine about 4 meters long and 2 meters wide was moved to the vicinity of the hatch. This is an electron barrier potential detector. Since the tail end needs to be connected to other equipment, it is difficult for the detector to carry it to high altitudes. As we all know, in statistical physics and solid-state physics, when discussing the Brillouin zone of a lattice, it is assumed that the atoms in the lattice are stationary in the equilibrium position. But in fact, the atoms in the crystal are undergoing thermal vibrations. This will have a certain impact on the movement of electrons. Since the mass of the nucleus is much larger than that of the electron, its movement speed is much slower than that of the electron. And since the mass of the electron is much smaller than that of the nucleus, the movement of electrons and nuclei can be treated separately. That is, only the Coulomb effect of the nucleus on the electron is considered, and the effects of the other two are not considered. It is equivalent to the nucleus only providing external potential to the electron. Under the Biot approximation, the multi-body system formed by electrons and nuclei will be transformed into the classical mechanical motion of the nucleus and the quantum mechanical motion of multiple electrons. The motion of the nucleus is approximately simple harmonic vibration, which can be regarded as the linear superposition of many lattice waves, and the quantum of the lattice wave is the phonon. The interacting multi-electron system is described by the Schrödinger equation. With the development of scientific and technological means, this technology has also been applied to the microscopic field and is no longer limited to crystals. For example, the Y particle. The wave vector classification of its electronic state is also completely consistent with the multi-body system. In other words, a single particle is seen as a solid, so as to study the additive nature. Of course, for the students who are not familiar with it, just know that this is a very important technology. The mapping of the potential energy field is very important for locking the specific location of the entrance. After all, the opposite is an alien space. If you are not sure where the entrance is, you can't blow it open even if you use the east wind. Because the two are not in the same coordinate system at all, just like your paper wife can only appear in the book but not in reality. Soon, the instrument started working. 3 minutes later, a three-dimensional potential energy diagram appeared on the screen. This is an undulating image like a hill, most of which are light blue, except for a red convex peak in the middle. Even a rough guy like Lin Ziming who doesn't know anything at all can understand what he has discovered when he sees this picture. Sure enough, Li Baoyan looked at this image and clapped his hands heavily, confirmed, the entrance is 17.65 meters in front of us, and the electron yield strength is fluctuating, indicating that this is a small cyclone similar to vortex. Note, some comments said that they wanted to see a scientific explanation of near space, and that alien space is not attractive. I can only say that you are completely wrong. The next few chapters will decrypt it, so keep reading. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304, The Unbreakable Cyclone. In the helicopter. Hearing Li Baoyan's words, Lin Ziming's expression was shocked. Academician Li, you said that the entrance to Shanghai is a cyclone. Li Baoyan nodded, pointed to the screen and said, yes, according to the potential energy field, it is like this. But from the image, the area of the cyclone is very small, probably only the size of a computer screen. Then he pressed a few times on another screen. He called up a picture and enlarged it. This is the high-definition image taken by the detector before. The location of the cyclone is here. Here, this is it. Lin Ziming looked at it. Just as Li Baoyan said. In this enlarged image, you can clearly see a small cyclone similar to an inverted vortex. It's just that the appearance of this cyclone looks very similar to a small cloud, and it is easy to be overlooked when browsing without purpose. Combining the potential energy field and the real image, it can now be determined that the Y particles are scattered from here. In other words, the cyclone is the intersection of the alien space where Shanghai is located and the local area. Looking at this small cyclone, Lin Ziming asked, Academician Li, is there a way to enter the Heavenly Palace from here? Li Baoyan thought for a moment and replied, I think we can try using drones or micro-robots first. If it doesn't work, we can only trouble Chief Wei to help. At present, the temperature tolerance of our military drones is more than 80 degrees below zero, and it can also operate normally near the cyclone. Lin Ziming heard this and immediately waved his hand. Okay, then use drones and micro-robots. The micro-robot was briefly introduced once when exploring the underground secret room of the Mo family. This technology is far from mature and is in the development and optimization stage. But within this range of more than 10 meters, it is not difficult to use it for a short time. Anyway, Lin Ziming didn't expect the drones and robots to capture any valuable content. As long as he could confirm that the entrance to the cyclone was passable, he would have completed the mission perfectly. Even if he was passively sucked into the cyclone, it didn't matter. The fear was not how bad the internal environment was, but that he couldn't get in. Soon, a drone and a micro-robot were quickly prepared and released at the same time. Buzz buzz buzz, the operator carefully pulled the two devices under the entrance cyclone, and then slowly rose. Then, the two devices passed through the cyclone at the same time without touching any objects. The shape of the cyclone was not destroyed, as if it was not in the same latitude. Lin Ziming's breathing paused for a second, and then returned to normal. The situation seemed to be developing in a bad direction. Then he exhaled, looked at Wei Fan, and said, Patriarch Wei, it seems that I have to trouble you to do something. Wei Fan nodded and checked the equipment. Then he took out a flying sword and went out of the cabin. Lin Ziming didn't expect that Wei Fan's move would unexpectedly liven up the atmosphere on the scene. Several young scientific researchers looked at the flying sword under Wei Fan with shining eyes, and whispered to each other. Even Li Baoyan was interested in watching this scene of flying in the air. After all, including Li Baoyan, no one in the cabin had actually seen a real practitioner. In addition to the flying sword, Wei Fan also had a high-strength safety rope tied to his body. This was an emergency measure to prevent certain unexpected situations, such as being hit by certain defense mechanisms and losing consciousness. Falling from an altitude of more than 4,000 meters, it would be like turning into spring mud and returning to the embrace of the motherland in various senses. After flying below the cyclone, Wei Fan first tried to touch the cyclone with his hands, but failed. Then he took out a second-level shuttle talisman and placed it flat in his hand. This is a very high-level barrier-breaking talisman that can easily break through various restrictions. After activating it, he threw it towards the cyclone, but there was still no reaction. Looking at the shuttle talisman falling into the distant mountains and forests, Wei Fan suddenly felt a pain in his heart. These are all spiritual stones. Then he quickly came back to his senses, took a deep breath, and used his divine thoughts, hoping to try to use his divine thoughts to pass through the cyclone. However, soon, he turned around and shook his head helplessly at Lin Ziming, the head above. Obviously, the divine thoughts also failed. Inside the helicopter cabin, Wang Qiang, who had been silent, sighed first. This girl was the one who had the deepest understanding of cultivation among all the people present. According to the research of Liu Lao's team, divine thoughts can arouse fluctuations in target cells, so it can be said to be an unconventional wave released by the pineal gland in nature. Divine thoughts cannot penetrate cyclones, which means that electromagnetic waves are definitely out of the question. As expected, Wei Fan's last attempt at electromagnetic wave penetration also failed. Looking at the many failed methods before and after, Lin Ziming was silent for a while and asked Li Baoyan, "Academician Li, do we have any other ways? For example, is it useful to use an ion beam to bombard it, in the past period of time? Whether it is the cracking of the monster crystal or the helium-ferrous barrier, the characteristics of the ion beam are basically used. However, the former is a physical bombardment, while the latter includes chemical reactions. Therefore, Lin Ziming has a lot of confidence in this high-end technology. In this case, his first reaction is to bombard it with an ion beam. It is quite like Mr. He, who is indecisive when he encounters corn. However, to his disappointment, Li Baoyan denied his idea. Ion beams are of little value in this situation and are not very useful. I have read those experimental reports. The purpose of bombarding the monster crystal is to collect samples for analysis, and the target is a macroscopic solid. The purpose of bombarding helium ferrous is mainly to consume the divalent ferrous ions in it, making the barrier belt completely ineffective. The cyclone in front of us does not have this kind of defense, and it is not solid. What we need to solve is the problem of crossing space. With our current scientific and technological means, it seems that there is no way to deal with this kind of alien space." Hearing Li Baoyan's words, Lin Ziming's expression became much heavier. Although Li Baoyan was only approved to contact the Damoji project recently, it does not mean that his sequence in the research system is very low. Being sent to Qingcheng Mountain to be responsible for the technical support of related theories is enough to show his ability. When this level of scientific research talents have professional counterparts, the scientific theories they master can basically represent the most advanced part of the country. Therefore, when Li Baoyan said it seems that there is no way, it can almost be said that the front-end technology can do nothing about this thing. Then Lin Ziming thought of something and asked in confusion, "But that's not right, Academician Li. If Y particles can come out of the Shanghai, there's no reason why our methods can't get in, right?" Li Baoyan glanced at him and said, "Colonel Lin, you may not have paid attention to what I said just now. I said that particle beams or ion beams are not very valuable in such occasions, not that they are not feasible. We have already determined that electromagnetic waves cannot pass through the cyclone. Combined with the situation that it absorbs nitrogen and releases Y particles, we can clearly judge one property of the cyclone, that is, it isolates waves and macroscopic matter, but can pass a certain amount of tiny particles. And particles want to transmit information. In addition to relying on waves for feedback, the only remaining channel that can be used is a classical channel. But if the classical channel can enter the Shanghai, then do we still need to worry about it? The so-called classical channel refers to the carrier that converts the signal to be transmitted into an analog signal during the sending and receiving process. That is, optical cables, wires and alike. If the rabbits can connect the optical cable to the Shanghai inside the cyclone, then things don't need to be so troublesome. Then, in order to verify his judgment, Li Baoyan fired several particle beams at the cyclone. Sure enough, some particles with a diameter smaller than that of the Y particle disappeared in the cyclone. But that was all. The particles passed through, but there was no feedback. More than 10 minutes later, the plane landed on the ground. Just as Lin Ziming walked out of the cabin door somewhat discouraged, his communicator suddenly rang. This was a professional communicator in the Xinhao camp, using long-wave frequency. Most of the contacts between Qin Hendong and others in the mainland and Lin Ziming were conducted through satellite equipment. Could it be that an acquaintance from the Great Mo realm returned to the mainland? Lin Ziming opened it with some doubts, and was shocked when he saw the person clearly. "Hey, why are you here?" Note, asking for monthly tickets at the end of the month. A writer friend in the boutique group was plagiarized. It was not long after another writer was plagiarized last time. I remember that I mentioned it in the writer's words at that time. And the fucking thing is that the plagiarized book not only plagiarized it verbatim, but also made more money than him. I vomited. The entry threshold for online writing is too low, and there are all kinds of monsters and demons. When will the rights of writers be fully protected? Chapter 305: The Rabbit's New Technology. Why can't I come? The person in the communication device heard Lin Ziming's words and couldn't help but smile and said, "The organization may not allow me to return to my homeland, right?" Lin Ziming blinked, looking puzzled. "But Academician Pan, weren't you studying the teleportation array before? Even when the Mo family's secret room was discovered, you didn't have time to go there. The program you scheduled for the New Year's Eve party didn't start, and in the end it was director Liu Zhenhan who went up to sing a song." That's right. The person who contacted Lin Ziming was none other than Academician Pan Jianwei, who hadn't appeared for a long time. Academician Pan is currently in charge of the extremely critical teleportation array research in the Great Mo Realm project, and basically lives a secluded life. His only two actions were to propose the judgment that the Great Mo Realm space is deteriorating and the suspected vacuum zero-point energy, which provided great help for the rabbits to solve related problems. He is like a prop in Happy Dictionary that removes a wrong answer. If you don't take action, it's fine, but if you do, it will definitely work. However, Lin Ziming heard that Academician Pan's research was at a critical stage recently, so why did he come to the mainland at this time? According to the information he knew, this big man is not the kind of person who likes to take a break and relax, especially in the continuous stage of this research. Facing Lin Ziming's question, Academician Pan smiled heartily and stopped keeping it a secret. "Colonel Lin, I was sent back to the mainland by the organization to help you solve the cyclone problem." Hearing this, Lin Ziming has not yet expressed his opinion. Li Baoyan on the side was shocked, and the whole person rushed to the communication equipment. The classic straight man's two nostrils pointed in front of the camera. "What do you mean? Xiao Pan, does the organization have any new plan?" Looking at this impetuous old man, Academician Pan's face showed a trace of helplessness. There are not many people in China who can call Academician Pan Xiao Pan, and Li Baoyan happens to be one of them. Academician Pan is 52 years old, and Li Baoyan is 67 years old this year, with an age difference of 1.5 generations. Academician Pan had once attended a class under Li Baoyan, so Li Baoyan could really call him Little Pan. Li Baoyan was very clear about the ability of his half-student. Now, it has only been more than an hour since the cyclone was discovered, and Academician Pan was sent back to the mainland at this time, which means that the feasibility of the plan he has in hand should be quite high. Otherwise, it would take at least half a day to pass the argumentation at the camp. "Hello, Mr. Li." In the communication equipment, Academician Pan Jianwei greeted Li Baoyan first, and then said, "It's not a new plan, but it should be considered a new technology. To put it simply, it is a breakthrough in classical channels. The specific situation is complicated after all, so let's talk about it when we meet." As soon as the four words "let's talk about it when we meet" came out. As an old scientific researcher who has participated in many classified projects, how could Li Baoyan not hear the importance of this new technology? He couldn't help but look at Lin Ziming, and the two nodded almost at the same time. "Okay, no problem, we'll wait for you in Qingchang Mountain." 10 hours later, Academician Pan arrived outside Qingchang Mountain with a team of people. Don't think 10 hours is a long time. Academician Pan Jianwei flew from Shanghai to Dongxian. It takes more than an hour to get from Guangmen to Dongxian, and then fly from Dongxian to Jumang Base, and finally fly to Qingchang Mountain. 10 hours can be described as the speed of light. Speaking of which, this is also the third batch of foreign aid that Lin Ziming has welcomed since he arrived at Qingchang Mountain. The country is hanging, so terrifying. After meeting, Academician Pan first pulled out his sparse front hair, and then greeted Lin Ziming and the others. "Colonel Lin, Mr. Li, I haven't seen you for a long time, and I miss you very much." Li Baoyan patted his shoulder and asked impatiently, "Xiao Pan, which barrier of classical channels have you broken through?" Academician Pan looked at him and blurted out two words, "Carrier." Li Baoyan's eyes widened when he heard this, and Lin Ziming on the side was confused. It was a typical chat between two well-known people, and a lot of people were confused. Yes, a lot. Of course. Academician Pan soon noticed Lin Ziming's situation and took the initiative to explain. "Colonel Lin, you may not know, A single quantum channel cannot complete information transmission. It requires the cooperation of a classical channel to transform the quantum state into information bits and be accepted. At present, 99.99% of the carriers of classical channels are optical fibers, and the remaining 0.01% are other solid substances similar to optical fibers. For example, ice cubes, metals, or superconductors at a certain temperature. In other words, the carrier must be a macroscopic solid, that is, something that we can see with our naked eyes. Other gases and ions are not allowed. This leads to the fact that we can send particles below a certain diameter into the cyclone, but we can't get any information from it because there is no classical channel as a carrier feedback. Lin Ziming and Li Baoyan nodded at the same time. They had tried it just now, and macroscopic objects could not pass through the cyclone barrier. The cyclone is like a filter, and only objects with a diameter smaller than the mesh can enter. Academician Pan Jianwei then paused and continued, but what you two may not know is that about 2 weeks ago, our team broke through the carrier barrier of the classical channel, allowing a certain ion to serve as a classical channel carrier. Li Baoyan's pupils shrank heavily, and his voice rose a few points. What ion? Beryllium ion. Seeing Li Baoyan, who was a little out of control, Academician Pan's tone slowed down a bit. You should know that the electronegativity of beryllium is 1.57 and the ionic radius is 31 pm. Not only is it smaller than other elements in the same group, it is also smaller than alkali metal elements. This radius can easily pass through the barrier of the cyclone and is extremely stable. Now we can encode the beryllium ion, so that it can continuously form a material-like channel, which can completely serve as a classical channel carrier inside and outside the cyclone. Li Baoyan took a deep breath, touched his chin and thought, beryllium? This is indeed a particle that meets the conditions. If I remember correctly, Mr. Yang proposed this hypothesis in 2009, right? But later even he thought it was impossible to achieve, so the project lasted only a few months before it was abandoned. Academician Pan nodded and confirmed what Li Baoyan said. The Mr. Yang that Li Baoyan mentioned was the famous Chinese physics, or the number one in the physics world today, Mr. Yang Zian. It was at an official meeting in 2009 that Mr. Yang proposed 4 elements for the development of channels in the next 30 years. Beryllium is one of them. But at that time, the rabbit's ion encoding technology had not yet been broken through, and they could not achieve preset state aggregation, so even Mr. Yang himself gave up. The entire project was carried out tentatively for 4 months, with a total investment of more than 3 million. According to him, this technology may take at least 50 to 80 years to produce results. Then Li Baoyan asked curiously, then Xiao Pan, how did you break through this barrier? Logically speaking, this should not be a technology that can be broken through at this stage, right? Academician Pan smiled and said, this is a brand new achievement of our teleportation array research team. We have cracked one of the key runes. Of course, part of the credit should be attributed to the disappeared comrade Wu Fan. Because before he disappeared, he mentioned one thing: some runes in the teleportation array are very similar to light gates. This made us focus on these runes at the beginning, rather than the teleportation array itself. At that time, our high-dimensional Bell state integrated observation ring confirmed a fact: the properties of the teleportation array meet the standard quantum hidden state transmission. In other words, the transmission must be carried out by a classical channel. Later, after our research, we found that one of the runes has the effect of ion preset state aggregation. It can encrypt and encode ions into channels, and then connect to the destination in a one-way way in some way, and finally get feedback. This ultra-long-distance method is still unknown to us at present. It may be the sky or the ground. But in short, it is a problem of long-distance grafting channel means. The rune itself encodes the ions that become the channel, which has been completely cracked by us. It is like we have mastered the technology of a Jedi laser sword, except that others can make the laser sword longer than 40 meters, while we can only make it longer than 4 meters. However, the super long sword body belongs to subsequent research, and we have already mastered the technology itself. Although this rune is not yet mass-produced, it is not difficult to build a simple channel near the cyclone. According to our experiments, this beryllium ion channel can be laid for about 800 meters in length. As long as the channel can be successfully built, our particles can enter the cyclone. Li Baoyan looked at academician Pan Jianwei, who was talking eloquently, and looked at the sky with emotion. Damo realm. Damo realm? He was already impatient to go to Damo realm to see how many technologies could be analyzed and used locally. Lin Ziming on the side thought of something and asked, Academician Pan, I remember you said something at the beginning. Our quantum teleportation is a stage where one gives birth to one gives birth to two gives birth to three, and three gives birth to all things. Now it seems that we have broken through the stage of one gives birth to one and come to the stage of one gives birth to two. Pan Jianwei nodded and said, yes. The classical channel of quantum communication is a very critical research link. Now we can build an ion channel, which means that we have entered the threshold of 2. From then on, it is a matter of advancing the speed, at least before 3. After saying this, several people walked into the temporary tent under the guidance of Lin Ziming. Academician Pan Jianwei's appearance this time was as powerful as usual. Not only did it provide a solution to the cyclone problem, but it also brought a good news that could be seen in the long run. Since it was close to 6 o'clock in the evening, the sky had already darkened, and the vision of many observation links was limited. Therefore, everyone discussed it and decided to start the channel hypothesis tomorrow morning. There was no conversation all night, and everyone slept very lightly. If there's anything special, it is that perhaps because of the reason that Academician Pan mentioned someone, and then thought of the content on the stone tablet, Lin Ziming had a dream unconsciously. In the dream, Wu Fan was chased by a monster in ragged clothes, gnawing on tree bark, miserable. The next morning, everyone woke up on time. This time, Li Baoyan and others did not rush to take off an hour in advance, but made relevant preparations on the ground. The altitude of more than 4,000 meters can be reached in the blink of an eye for the Z-18, so it is enough to go up about 10 minutes in advance. At 5:40 in the morning, the Cyclone Secondary Exploration Project team officially set off. This time the project team was led by Academician Pan, and Lin Ziming and Li Baoyan received information on the ground. Beep beep, the helicopter quickly reached an altitude of more than 4,000 meters and hovered more than 20 meters outside the cyclone. At 5:55 in the morning, the Y particles escaped as expected. Academician Pan Jianwei was sitting in the cabin at this time, with an instrument similar to a projector beside him. There is a spiritual stone behind the instrument as an energy source. There are 2 strange runes on the left and right sides. 2 black superconducting tangents are connected below the runes. The tail of the tangent is connected to a coding chip. The outside of the instrument is connected to a huge giant storage device, which is loaded with countless beryllium ions. This set is the latest equipment developed by the rabbits, called the ion channel instrument. In addition, there is a particle instrument, or a high-density plus baryon instrument, at the other end of the cabin. As we all know, there are 61 elementary particles in total, excluding gravitons. Simply put, according to the current standard metal and particle physics, all known particles are these elementary particles or are composed of these elementary particles. Most of the matter in the universe that we can observe is hadrons, that is, particles that participate in strong interactions. These particles can be divided into 2 categories, baryons and mesons. Baryons are composed of 3 quarks, and mesons are composed of a pair of positive and negative quarks. For example, neutrons and protons are both baryons, which are a type of composite particles. Protons are composed of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, and neutrons are composed of 1 up quark and 2 down quarks. The properties of mesons are more complicated. Outside the nucleus, mesons appear in nature only as short-lived products of some very high-energy collisions between quark particles. And all mesons are unstable, and the longest lifespan can only last for a few hundredths of a microsecond. So this time the communication particles used are high-density plus baryons, not mesons. In fact, Greek letter pi mesons are the most suitable, but I don't like the national stance of Yukawa Hideki, so I just ignore it. After everything was ready, Academician Pan Jianwei personally pressed the start button. An ion beam invisible to the naked eye was emitted from the ion channel instrument. A large number of encoded beryllium ions quickly gathered to form a stable ion channel in the air. As if performing the master's task, they were very obedient. Then the channel extended straight outward and finally entered the cyclone. The ion radius of 31 pm made it easy for the channel to break through the barrier of the cyclone. Report: the channel has been laid into the cyclone. The channel has been laid. What remains is to transmit the particles in and receive the receipt. Academician Pan Jianwei's expression remained unchanged, and he calmly ordered, turn on the high-density baryon instrument, and transmit the signal. Understood. After a moment, The high-density baryon instrument was turned on. Compared with the ion channel instrument, the sound and vibration of the high-density baryon instrument are much louder, and it keeps buzzing. After all, it is a high-voltage device. Soon, a beam of baryons shot out along the channel and stabbed into the cyclone again like a second stick. Academician Panjayanwati stared at the screen closely, clenching his fists. After about half a minute, a sand-tapping sound suddenly sounded on the screen. A few seconds later, a picture suddenly appeared on the screen. It was a dark space, and the specific area could not be seen. The space was full of ruins and devastation. All the buildings were razed to the ground, and there was no sign of any plants or creatures. It was desolate. Only the very center of the space. In front of a seemingly ruined main hall, there is something similar to a formation. Since the ion channel cannot change the perspective, these are the only scenes that academician Panjayanwati could see this time. But in general, this experiment was undoubtedly extremely successful. Then he suddenly realized something and said in surprise, "Wait, there is light in this space." Note, today is just this chapter, 2 chapters in one, so as not to be scolded for breaking the chapter. And monthly votes, everyone. The writer who has plagiarized said in the afternoon that the plagiarist's attitude is still very arrogant, saying that he is not afraid of being banned and will continue to plagiarize under another account. The original author seems to have earned hundreds of thousands of yuan after writing for several months, but the plagiarized book made more than 100,000 yuan a month. It's really unfair. I will try to start 3 updates tomorrow. Chapter 306 3 Scenes. That's right. Although the inside of the Shanghai is a little dim, the scene is still visible to the naked eye. Baryons can transmit light after being encoded. This technology was mastered by the rabbits as early as 2011. At present, many domestic private institutions have relevant technical reserves, which is a very mature particle encoding technology. However, there has been no breakthrough in the channel carrier before, and most of the transmitted images use waves or rendering photons, which has led to this technology never being used. Now with a microscopic channel composed of beryllium ions as a carrier, baryons can perfectly transmit the image back. However, although baryons can transmit light, they do not have, or cannot do, the encoding infrared function. In other words, if there is no light inside the Shanghai, then the screen will definitely be dark. But the current situation can clearly show that there is a light source in the Shanghai. I have to say that this is a very critical information. If it is a modern background, it is not outrageous to reserve enough energy for some small areas to use for thousands of years. Many high-purity energy sources, as long as the conditions are right, can last for 2,000 years, let alone until the end of Conan. But what era did Zheng Daoling live in? The Eastern Han Dynasty. At that time, there were no nuclear reactors for you to reserve. The means of ignition for the people were either candles or bonfires. In the wild, they would add bonfires or torches. At most, they would occasionally light a lamp when they encountered some tyrants in power. Whether there is oxygen in the Shanghai needs to be investigated separately, but the temperature is definitely dozens of degrees below zero, and there is basically no possibility of burning and emitting light. In this case, there is only one possibility for visible light in the Shanghai: spiritual energy. In other words, there must be some kind of equipment in the Shanghai that uses spiritual energy as energy, which has been providing light sources for more than 2,000 years. And if nothing unexpected happens, the reserve of spiritual energy in the Shanghai is unlikely to be too low. Academician Panjayanwati then reported this situation to the ground. Soon, Lin Ziming replied, "Next time, for sure. No, increase the intensity." At present, the laying limit of the beryllium ion channel is 800 meters, and the distance between the helicopter and the cyclone is about 30 meters. Let's assume that it is 50 meters, and the beryllium ion channel can also be pushed into the inside for 750 meters. Considering that some students who are not familiar with it find it difficult to understand, let's use another example to describe it. You can regard the beryllium ion channel as the frame of the camera lens, and the baryon is the lens of the lens. To be honest, this analogy is not very rigorous. The core theory is completely different, but the properties or applications are actually similar, so let's just look at it this way. Anyway, we don't ask for full marks, just pass the test. As for the principle of the camera, everyone knows that it converts the optical image signal into an electrical signal. When we shoot an object, The light reflected from the object will be collected by the camera lens and focused on the light receiving surface of the camera device. Then the camera device converts the light into electrical energy, that is, the video signal. The photoelectric signal is very weak and needs to be amplified by the preamplifier circuit, and then processed and adjusted by various circuits. The standard signal obtained at the end can be sent to a recording medium such as a video recorder for recording, or transmitted through a transmission system to a monitor for display. Therefore, if the impact of building barriers is not considered, the ratio of the beryllium ion channel to the shooting distance is about 1 to 3. That is, a 750-meter channel can probably shoot scenes of more than 2 kilometers, and in theory, it is a full-scale 360 degrees shooting without dead angles. Therefore, after receiving Lin Ximing's instructions, academician Pan Jianwei immediately waved his hand, turned the output power to the maximum. Hit it, understood. After a moment, the beryllium ion channel suddenly became thicker and longer, just like something that took medicine. It seemed to have evolved from a toothpick to a mineral water bottle. In this way, the effect of the picture transmitted back was naturally much higher. Soon, the pictures displayed on the screen became more and clearer. The technician divided the main control screen into 12 split screens in a timely manner. These 12 split screens include the 4 major directions of the Shanghai, the close-up of the formation, the gathering area of the collapsed buildings, etc. However, due to the dim light, many distant scenes still appear blurry. For example, the light source. Even though academician Pan has turned the power to the maximum at this time, he still can't see where the light comes from. However, from the many pictures taken back, one thing can be easily analyzed. That is, the area of this underground palace is probably not small, and the length and width will not be less than 3 kilometers at least. It is much larger than the hundreds of square meters that the rabbits had expected before. Although the area of the underground palace is unknown, its height is not difficult to determine. The top is about 100 meters, which means that this space should not be as difficult to measure as the Kyangu mountain pit. Then academician Pan tried to enlarge several pictures and finally confirmed 3 very clear pictures. The first picture is naturally the entrance of the cyclone. It is a bit weird. The entrance outside is a cyclone, but the style inside is a green square mark with a length and width of about 5 centimeters. And the direction of the cyclone is obviously towards the ground in the native land, but the position of the mark is on the side of this space. That is to say, the ground of the space is perpendicular to the local land surface. There is a strange character engraved in the center of the mark, which looks a bit like this text. Academician Pan thought for a moment and said to Wei Fan, "Patriarch Wei, please come and take a look. Do you recognize this mark?" Wei Fan came over and took a few glances, then shook his head. "Sorry, I have never seen this symbol before, but maybe I can ask Johnson. He has much more knowledge in this area than I do." Academician Pan nodded slightly and thanked him. This was just a casual question, so he didn't feel too disappointed. Then he cast his eyes on the second picture. The second picture was the collapsed main body of the palace. The palace was just 1 kilometer in front of the entrance, and it was difficult to see it clearly. The original height of the palace was unknown, and various ruins collapsed and piled up on the ground, leaving a devastated scene. However, judging from one of the load-bearing columns that did not collapse, its original height should have been between 20 and 30 meters. The third picture was the formation more than 10 meters in front of the palace, which was also the only object in the heavenly palace that was suspected to be working continuously. The width of the formation was about 5 or 6 meters, and there were a large number of runes engraved around it. Some of them were still emitting crystal light. If nothing unexpected happens, this should be the legendary formation under Mount Qingcheng. This is all the information that the beryllium ion channel can collect, and then academician Pan returned to the ground. As soon as he landed, Lin Ximing came up to him. "Academician Pan, do you have a way to open the heavenly palace?" Chapter 307 Plan. Open the Shanghai, on the ground. Facing the question raised by Lin Ximing, academician Pan was stunned at first, and then fell into deep thought. Lin Ximing did not say much, for fear of disturbing the other party's thoughts. It's not that he rarely encountered academician Pan's move, so he grabbed him and fleeced him, and squeezed him like a donkey in the production team. It's because although there are many local experts, there are really few who can compare with academician Pan. As the saying goes, every profession has its own specialty. In quantum encryption communication, or now it can be said that in the field of space transmission, Academician Pan is already the well-deserved number 1. The transmission array of the Great Mo realm is like a copy, which has added a lot of experience that Academician Pan can hardly learn on the technology side. Just like Bruce Lee, he combined the martial arts of various schools and finally created Jeet Kune Do. Although he is one person, he is worth thousands of troops. Therefore, if there is anyone in the country who can crack the entry and exit restrictions of the Shanghai, it must be Academician Pan. After a while, Academician Pan Jianwei suddenly thought of something. His eyes lit up, and he uttered a soft tisk. When most people think about a problem, they will follow up with a hiss. Then they shake their heads helplessly and bitterly, indicating that they are powerless. But Academician Pan is different. His tisk means that he already has some ideas in his mind. Unfortunately, Lu Chaoyuan, his partner, was not present, and the people at the scene did not know about this. Lin Ziming on the side had prepared a consolation speech, but he heard Academician Pan say, "Colonel Lin, I do have an idea. Theoretically, it should be feasible." Lin Ziming was stunned for a few seconds, and then his face was happy. "What? You have a plan?" After saying this, he remembered that he knew nothing about the relevant knowledge, so he stepped aside and gave up Li Baoyan's position. "Why don't you talk to Mr. Li?" Academician Pan Jianwei took the glass of water handed by his assistant, moistened his throat, and said, "Mr. Li, my idea is to use Zik++ baryons to break the barrier. What do you think, good guy?" As soon as he opened his mouth, he said a word that Lin Ziming didn't understand. But this word did not faze Li Baoyan. As an academician-level expert, even though he was not as good as Academician Pan Jianwei in non-main fields, he was still very sharp in thinking. Therefore, after Academician Pan Jianwei mentioned the specific substances, he quickly figured out some possibilities. "Ziopan, you mean, start with the characteristics of heavy quarks?" Academician Pan nodded and affirmed, "Yes, there are condensed particles and spiritual energy in the Shanghai, so I think we can try from this angle. After all, it is too difficult for real technology to tear space. In many novels, the protagonist can often tear a piece of space easily. For example, a 10-ton steamroller proves the truth. But in fact, the possibility is very, very low. Theoretically, to expel the energy contributed by all known quantum fields in every cubic meter of space, at least 1.6 E111 joules of energy is required. It is about the equivalent of 3.8 E101 tons of TNT. I think I calculated correctly. There are about 1 E80 atoms in the observable universe. Even if each atom becomes a thermonuclear weapon with a TNT equivalent of 1 million tons, it still cannot break through 1 cubic meter of space. The existence that can break through an inconspicuous 1 cubic meter of space without changing color or beating heart. Probably shaking a hair can blow up all the baryonic matter in the observable universe. If this huge energy is stored in a body of the same size as the human body, it is basically a bunch of singularities piled together, that is, a human-shaped self-propelled black hole. Therefore, the current level of technology on Earth is definitely not able to do this. It is estimated that it will be difficult to do it in a few hundred years, and there may be a little chance in 1,000 years. Therefore, if you want to break through the cyclone space, you must start from other angles. The materials that the rabbits can use are actually very limited. They are divided into existing particles in the local area and materials in the Shanghai. The external ones have particles with a diameter less than 163 pm, including but not limited to ++ baryons, Greek letter sigma mesons and beryllium ions, etc. Inside the Shanghai are Y particles, that is, condensed particles, microorganisms that produce Y particles, and auras of unknown concentration. This is like a cooking challenge. Give you a bunch of limited ingredients, and then you have to make a perfect dish. The answer given by Academician Pan Jianwei is the Zik++ baryon he mentioned. The discoverer of the Zik++ baryon is the famous academician Gao Yuaning, also known as Gao Nanshan. He was a well-known boss of Shumu, and later jumped to the next door. The Zik++ baryon is also called the double charm baryon ++, which was discovered by the LHCb research group of Huashi and Shumu in 2017. The baryons discovered in the past contain at most one heavy quark. This is the first time that a baryon containing two heavy quarks has been discovered in the experiment, which is a discovery that changes the textbook level. This discovery was selected as one of the top 10 scientific research projects in China that year, and ranked fourth in the global quantum research results in 2017. And what is very interesting is that not long after the discovery of Zik++ baryons, new changes appeared on Tabby's star, KIC 8,462,852, which is suspected to be a Dyson sphere. Therefore, many people jokingly said that Gonanshan's discovery disturbed the rules of the universe, laughing. The last sentence is of course a joke, but in a sense, Zik++ baryons are indeed a discovery that changes traditional concepts. If the results of SELEX have troubled related theoretical physics for a long time, the results of LHCb directly made theoretical physicists despair. This involves a concept, baryon acoustic oscillation. Some call it baryon acoustic oscillation. Before talking about baryon acoustic oscillation, here is another piece of knowledge that may subvert many people's cognition, that is, there is actually sound in space. First of all, from the perspective of classical physics, space is not an absolute vacuum, but the particle density is indeed very low. There is plasma in space, and the density outside the Earth's magnetosphere is 3-10 particles per cubic centimeter. And plasma is compressible, so of course it will produce sound waves. When the frequency is high, due to the large mass of ions, it cannot keep up with the frequency of oscillation. At this time, it is mainly electrons that are oscillating, and ions serve as background. They form so-called electron sound waves, called Langmuir waves. There is another phenomenon, which is the baryon acoustic oscillation mentioned above. Simply put, baryon acoustic oscillation is the ripples of the high and low distribution density of baryons, such as protons and neutrons, which are recorded and propagated in the void. And the advanced content of this ripple must be well known to everyone, dark matter. Or even so to say, the theoretical basis for the existence of dark matter is based on baryon acoustic oscillation. Of course, dark matter has not been discovered yet, and the closest to it should be axions. If the experiment can confirm the discovery of axions, then not only can a dark matter particle be captured, but also the strong CP problem that has troubled physicists for a long time can be solved in one fell swoop. Thus, the theoretical understanding of symmetry and antimatter is raised to a new level. Therefore, a large number of scientists are currently conducting research in this direction, some for purely academic research, and some for fame and fortune. There have even been many cases of members of a project team rebelling with data. The worst was a rebellion that occurred at the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland. At that time, a member of the project team not only fled with the data, but also burned other isolated copies to ashes. By the way, this person is from a neighboring island country. In short, the two heavy quarks that appear in the Zik++ baryon may produce super energy level reactions in a very small area under certain conditions. There are many similar concepts in life. For example, many people may not know that when a soap bubble explodes, the instantaneous temperature can reach 20,000 degrees. But its magnitude is too small, so it can't have any effect at all. The Zik++ baryon is the same. Theoretically speaking, if two heavy quarks are combined with special photons to form plasma, and then react with some special substances, its instantaneous reaction can reach the oscillation level. However, the so-called special matter has not been discovered yet, so this hypothesis remains in the theoretical stage. But academician Pan Jianhui dared to put forward this idea because there is some kind of matter in Xiangguang. This matter is still very different from the special matter mentioned above, but the cyclone itself is related to the mainland by a certain gap, not exploding out of thin air. This provides a theoretical basis for the operation. And this substance is Reiki. I will update 3 chapters tomorrow. I am too sleepy today. My sleep these days is like this. I sleep until 5:30 in the afternoon, code 1 chapter, and then send out the chapter prepared the day before as 2 chapters, and use my mobile phone to accompany my grandpa at night. My grandpa has been discharged from the hospital. I was going to update 3 chapters today, but I found that I was too sleepy, so I went to bed first. If I can wake up at noon tomorrow, I will be able to type faster on the computer, and there will be no problem with 3 chapters. And then I ask for a monthly ticket. Chapter 308, Breaking into the Heavenly Palace. Aura. This is the real alpha gas that can be confirmed at present. The earliest person to propose the concept of alpha gas was Arrhenius. This big guy and Van Hove, 2 brainiacs in the field of chemistry, have proposed various wild ideas. To use an online writer as an analogy, that is, the main business of writing books can sign platinum contracts to make a lot of money, and then go to the writer forum to post and throw out settings whenever there is nothing to do. These ideas are almost unfounded, and many of them are mythological terms reduced to the category of nouns. Alpha gas is one of them. It is defined as the gestational gas of all things, composed of God factor, and was called by Irenaeus as the forbidden fruit of the Garden of Eden that can enter a new era after its discovery. Of course. From a practical point of view, most of what Irenaeus envisioned was not aura. After all, Irenaeus had not been exposed to Chinese culture at that time. But no matter what, aura is definitely a gas that fits this idea, so as the research on spirits gradually deepens, Irenaeus can rest in peace in the underground. What? You said Irenaeus was blind 2 years before his death? Then I wish him a good rebirth. Don't do chemistry in your next life. Biochemical and environmental materials are pit. Let's get back to the original topic. In the previous research on the 12.7mm psychic armor-piercing projectile, Tang Pin once mentioned a detail. That is, the detonator of the psychic armor-piercing projectile is provided by the main body of the monster crystal. And the main body of the monster crystal is solid spiritual energy. In other words, there is extremely high energy in the solid spiritual energy. According to the calculations of the rabbits, the unit energy spectrum of this high-energy substance even reaches the level of 4.4 MeV. The Y particles that make up the evil spirit are also a kind of high-energy particles. In a sense, the energy generated by the freezing point after it loses control may be more violent. Therefore, with these two particles, coupled with a plasma rich in Zinc++ baryons and special photons, there is a chance to break the space sealed by the mark. Seeing that Li Baoyan was also convinced, Lin Ziming reported the plan proposed by academician Pan Jianwei to the core layer. The core layer was also keeping an eye on the progress of Qingchang Mountain. Therefore, after receiving the plan, the core layer quickly organized a demonstration and even urgently mobilized Xian for assistance. 4 hours later, the core layer sent guidance on the plan. The opinion was very concise, just 2 words, pass. After all, the core layer is not some unscrupulous big water. The core layer's statement did not exceed the expectations of Lin Ziming and others. Therefore, after receiving the relevant reply, Qingchang Mountain quickly entered the test preparation stage. The key to the preparation is naturally plasma. Plasma is actually a very interesting thing. This term covers both low-end fields and the forefront of scientific research. The so-called low-end refers to ordinary plasma, which is the thing that Cassidon brings with his A. This kind of plasma is very simple to make, and basically few people with some conditions can make it. Just prepare an aluminum foil with a diameter of several centimeters to reflect microwaves, and then use a graphite pencil cord to conduct electricity with the aluminum foil to supply high-temperature carbon dioxide. Finally, cover the plasma with a glass jar and put it in the microwave. Start the timer from short to long to avoid empty burning. As long as you are not unlucky, you will succeed with a high probability. It is not dangerous, will not explode, and has no radiation. The plasma that appears is like a fire explosion or ball lightning, which is a simple batch. The reason why it is said to include the most cutting edge. It is because the concepts of room temperature superconductors and controlled nuclear fusion that everyone is familiar with are related to it. The plasma of Zinc++ baryons and special photons is also one of them. Therefore, I will not talk about the specific configuration process, which is somewhat dangerous. Once this experiment gets out of control, the end can be referred to the first chapter of Lord of Mysteries. In addition, Zinc++ baryons are not free baryons, and their survival period is very short under normal circumstances. Therefore, it is necessary to increase the holding with sufficient and complete conditions to extend it to the point where it can successfully enter the Shanghai for reaction. For the above reasons, this preparation took 2 days to complete. At this time, a whole week had passed since Lin Ziming and others first arrived at Qingchang Mountain. Fortunately, it is normal for activities such as the Mountain Closure Festival to last for a month, so there are still no major loopholes in confidentiality. 2 days later, it is still the area where the detector was launched before. Academician Pan, who looked more haggard than 2 days ago, was standing in front of the launch pad with Lin Ziming. Next to them was a small black box and an extremely strange detector. The flight control structure of this detector was somewhat similar to that of a drone, and the gimbal looked basically the same. But one very special thing was that it had a mechanical arm on each side of the center. This looked very similar to the image of the monster in Pokemon. You can imagine the monster lying on all fours with its 2 hands waving in the air. After all the people around were gathered, Academician Pan held a small box with his hand and said to Lin Ziming, "Colonel Lin, this box contains Zik++ baryons and rendered photons. Under certain conditions inside, photons will couple with baryons due to the presence of free electrons to form plasma. At this time, baryons are not only affected by the gravitational potential, but also by the radiation pressure generated by photons. Gravity and radiation pressure counteract each other, forming a longitudinal wave similar to sound wave oscillation. The output end of the box will perform some kind of cutting on this longitudinal wave, so that after reaching a certain initial density, it will react violently with the spiritual energy and Yi particles inside the Shanghai." Lin Ziming nodded as if he understood, and then asked, "Academician Pan, if everything goes well, how big a hole can we make?" Academician Pan heard this, and a hint of uncertainty appeared on his face. "It's hard to say. After all, we know nothing about the situation inside the Shanghai. But according to the model we designed, the Shanghai may be blasted with a gap of about 20 centimeters in length and width." Lin Ziming blinked when he heard this. "Ah, only 20 centimeters? I was thinking people could go in." Academician Pan smiled and said, "This gap is big enough for scientific research. We can put small sampling equipment in. With current scientific and technological means, collecting samples of soil, bricks, and air is basically no different from real people going in for scientific research." Wang Qiang on the side poked the container with her finger, then found something, and asked curiously, "By the way, Academician Pan, if the gap in the Shanghai is successfully opened, what should we do if the Y particles and spiritual energy in it escape?" Academician Pan smiled steadily, raised his index finger and pointed at the Shanghai. "This is not a big problem. Although the specific length and width of the Shanghai are uncertain, the height is over there. No matter how big it is, it won't be that big. In other words, the Y particles and spiritual energy contained in it are limited. Even if the entire space is full of this substance, it will not have much impact on the local area. At most, it will be a little color here. It would be a great thing if the area within a radius of 10 miles outside the mountain gate could drop by 2 degrees. In the winter, the temperature in the deep mountains and old forests drops by 2 degrees. Who can think of the idea of alien space? Not to mention that if there is a gas overflow, we can use technical means to neutralize the Y particles, and then let the Wei clan leader Wang Daocheng and others absorb the spiritual energy. In addition, comrades Io Wang, aren't you here? In terms of the understanding of Y particles and spiritual energy in China, no one can compare with you." After being praised by Academician Pan, Wang Qiang, the carefree girl, was a little embarrassed. Scratching her head and grinning like a 20-something leftover woman, after everything was ready, Lin Ziming conveyed the order, "The probe is launched, all departments are in place, and prepare to break through the Shanghai." Note, there were comments before that the difficulty of opening the near space is low, and I am afraid that I can't open the alien space. Now there should be no objection, right? Low difficulty is easy to write, but it cannot derive new technologies. The value of opening the alien space will definitely be higher. I am not bragging. Many things that everyone thinks are difficult, for people engaged in this profession, there is really no lack of theory. The difficult part is to realize it in reality. This is not the end, everyone is behind. I wonder if any genius students can guess what it is. Many clues have been laid out in the front. In fact, the appearance of Academician Pan in this plot is already a hint. Chapter 309 Breaking into the Heavenly Palace. Since the height of the cyclone entrance is only more than 4,000 meters. Therefore, this time the ground did not use a booster for launch, but used a drone-like method to control the probe to take off. Just like the Siberian tiger is also called an orange cat and 155mm is also called a sniper, there is nothing wrong with classifying this kind of probe as a drone. The main body of the probe is almost a 3x3 square with a height of more than half a meter. There is a container for storing plasma, and the energy comes from the prepared power supply. The preliminary preparation has been completed on the ground, so the power consumption in the air stage is actually not high. Even advanced energy is not needed, ordinary lithium batteries are enough. In addition to the container, the 2 mechanical arms serve as fluid outlets. The above are all the equipment of this probe. Well, that's all. There is no sampling equipment or detection robot. If you have to find another device, it is at most the camera on the gimbal. The reason why the probe is so simple is very simple. Because if nothing unexpected happens, it will most likely be fallen by the energy wave when the space is broken. The docking link must be carried out in the vicinity. Unless the probe can teleport, there is no possibility of escape. Anyway, it is not difficult to reach an altitude of more than 4,000 meters, and various plans can be carried out in stages. Buzz buzz buzz, this probe with a special mission took off quickly and arrived outside the cyclone entrance within a few minutes. On the ground, Feng Ping, a member of Wang Hua's team who had previously performed the Shanghai positioning mission, was still responsible for the actual operation of the probe this time. Report: the probe has reached an altitude of 4,300 meters and is currently 4 meters below the cyclone. It can start docking at any time. Li Baoyan and Academician Pan Jianwei looked at each other and ordered, "Start, spray plasma." Understood. After receiving the order, Feng Ping immediately began to operate. His expression was serious but not nervous, and he looked calm. This is one of the necessary qualities of an operator. Even if the Earth is destroyed in the next second, it cannot shake his mind. The fluid cabin is open, and the acoustic resonance is detected. Acoustic resonance is normal. The average kinetic energy deviation value is 0.21 per 10,000. All data are normal. The ion docking channel is open, and the plasma slurry is being assembled. It is expected to enter the cyclone within 15 seconds. Although the name of plasma slurry contains the word slurry, it is actually not a viscous paste. It is a high-energy state of matter, and its physical properties are different from those of solid, liquid and gas. It is very simple to guide the movement of plasma slurry. Just preset an electromagnetic field. Under the interference of this electromagnetic field, the plasma slurry composed of Zi++ baryons and rendered photons quickly gathered at the exit of the fluid cabin and entered the final docking juncture. Countdown for 15 numbers: 15, 14, 3, 2, 1, eject. Whoosh! The next second, a turbid white plasma slurry rushed into the dark hole of the cyclone. At this moment, in the microscopic world that cannot be seen by the naked eye, a large number of tiny particles pass through the filter of the cyclone. The number density of electrons near the entrance of the cyclone was compressed to an astonishing value in a short period of time. According to the Boltzmann relationship, at this moment, the field strength inside the electrons also increased sharply. Under this electric potential field, the spiritual energy and Yi particles in the heavenly palace were also attracted involuntarily. A new energy was introduced, neutralized, and feedback was generated. Gradually, on a tiny track that was barely detectable, a certain particle vibrated a few times and began to swirl. It was like a Yasuo player who used E to attack his soldiers, and disappeared in a flash. E over and E over, so happy. This swirl took a very short time, only about 1/10,000th of a second. As the saying goes, Yasuo's happiness is contagious. Therefore, after another 10,000,000th of a second, the second swirling particle appeared. Then the third, the 10th, and the 1,000th. By 9/10,000ths of a second, the number of these happy particles had reached 600,000. But this was far from being happy enough, far from enough. Therefore, soon, another excited particle died. It's like you met a happy Yasuo player in the ranking, and you couldn't help but play Yasuo in the next game. The same is true one after another. When the time comes to 3/millionths of a second, the number of various particles that are happily spinning has reached hundreds of millions. Some of them are fast, and some are slower. Students who have run exercises when they were in school should know. A 400-meter track, if there is a class of people running, then the entire track will be very wide. But if there are 30 classes of students running at the same time, and everyone's speed is different, the track will become very crowded. For example, you are running and running for a few steps, and someone appears in front of you, so you have to adjust your stride to go around him and continue running. But the human body can slow down and adjust its stride, but particles can't do this. They are like a racing car without brakes, and they can't stop at all. Do you expect a Yasuo to stop when he sees the line of soldiers? Therefore, when the density reaches a certain level, accidents happen. I saw a certain Higgs particle shouting woohoo while passing an unionized neutral particle and making an international friendly gesture to it. However, while it was making the gesture, a huge Y particle suddenly appeared in front of it. The diameter of the Y particle is very large, so it moves very slowly. At this time, the speed of the Higgs particle, due to the energy provided by the spiritual energy, reached an astonishing 1% of the speed of light. So, this Higgs particle could only watch the figure in front of it getting bigger and bigger, and then it collided with a Y particle. At the moment when the two particles collided, due to the extremely fast speed, a 10-13 Gaussian magnetic field appeared. Although this magnetic field lasted for a very short time, it was still at the Wokian level even in the microscopic field. But because of its intensity, it was too great. It was so large that in this extremely short period of time, it quickly affected several excited particles around it. Just like a chain rear-end collision, these excited particles also deviated from their orbits one after another and collided heavily with other particles. A moment later, countless particles collided with each other, and a series of beautiful scenes appeared. If the energy level spectrum of this area is collected afterwards, the collector will trace back to an image as wonderful as a fireworks celebration. When these countless particles collide with each other, the fluctuations they produce are no longer limited to the realm invisible to the naked eye. At this moment, the space at the entrance of the cyclone suddenly fluctuates. Then a super high energy level of energy spurted out and instantly swallowed the detector. Bang! The detector burst into a ball of sparks in the air, and not even the wreckage was left. And through another floating device 400 meters away, it can be clearly seen that the Shanghai opened with the explosion of the detector. Note, in the last 2 days of the month, please vote for the monthly ticket. The update volume for this month was posted yesterday 200,000 plus in 28 days. Some readers reported that there is no video. Is this the case for everyone? Chapter 310, Inside the Heavenly Palace. High in the sky. Although the energy caused by the impact of particles is extremely huge. But as mentioned before, the unstable space at the entrance that can be used for blasting is just a tiny bit. Therefore, after the impact caused by the space vibration, the area near the entrance quickly returned to calm. It can be said that the Shanghai blasting plan went very smoothly and was completely in line with expectations. Yes, blasting. Again 155 can be called a sniper, so it is reasonable to classify the vibration space as blasting, right? As for the space collapse or Shanghai's link break that may be caused by the blasting, it was excluded when the plan was made. As mentioned in the previous article, with the technology currently mastered by the rabbits, it is definitely impossible to blast an independent space. The main reason why the cyclone entrance can be blasted is that its entrance is like a sieve, with a large number of tiny holes connected to the local area. The energy generated by the reaction of plasma and spiritual energy Y particles can just smash the sieve, while not affecting the surrounding complete space. The barrier is stable, so there is no need to worry about the entire space being disconnected. It's like a metal lottery box with a thin paper covering the opening. Although the paper is a seal, you can poke it open with your finger with a little effort. But if you want to pierce the other metal outer walls of the lottery box with a single finger, you can try it if you are confident. You have to pay for the surgery yourself. Unless technology advances and your fingers are replaced with alloy materials such as titanium steel, you will have no way to deal with this outer wall. The site returns to the cyclone entrance. Not long after the cyclone was shaken open, several drones that were originally several hundred meters away quickly surrounded the entrance. Their duty is not to perform detection tasks, but to monitor whether there are excessive Y particles, spiritual energy or other substances escaping. If a large amount of matter is ejected out of control, other equipment on standby farther away will quickly come to deal with it. A few minutes later, on the ground, Li Baoyan's assistant Zhao Haiming raised his hand from the main console, his expression slightly relaxed. Report. Only a small amount of spiritual energy and Y particles overflowed from the entrance of the cyclone, and the volume is controllable, much less than expected. Judging from the momentum of the particles, the air pressure in the Shanghai should be the same as the pressure at an altitude of 4,000 meters. Li Baoyan nodded calmly and continued, very good, Xiao Zhao. How big is the entrance of the cyclone after it is broken? It's about a circle with a diameter of 40 centimeters. 40 centimeters. Li Baoyan touched his chin thoughtfully and said, our original estimate was more than 20 centimeters, at most about 28. It seems that the stable structure of the entrance is lower than we expected. But even if there are 30 centimeters, the human body will definitely not be able to enter. The only possible Guo Xiaox was passed because of his character when the riders were selected. Then he looked at Lin Ximing and said, Colonel Lin, give the order. Although Li Baoyan and Akita Mission Pan were both in charge of the execution, Lin Ximing was still the general person in charge of the scene. Some important projects had to be approved by him. For example, the sampling detection to be carried out next. Although various machines were used for sampling, Someone had to take a helicopter to go up in the preparatory stage. And the candidates for the helicopter. Lin Ziming glanced at Li Baoyan and academician Pan Jianwei who were eager to try. He wanted to persuade them in his heart, but when he thought of Liu Xiangqian, Hu Jin and others he had met before, the persuasion that had already run to the corner of his mouth finally turned into a sigh. Hey, Mr. Li, academician Pan, be more careful about the launch detection mission. Execute. Beep beep. 5 minutes later. 2 Z-18s flew into the sky, one after another, and stayed near the entrance of the cyclone. After the fuselage stopped steadily, in the helicopter cabin, academician Pan Jianwei was explaining various information to Wei Fan. His left hand pressed the top shell of a device, and his right hand clicked a switch. This is a gas sampler codenamed Q1, the start end is here. This is a frost temperature sensing device, the big one is the main control, the small one is the sub-control. This is, academician Pan explained many and various things, and most people could only understand a few of them at most. But Wei Fan is a practitioner of the 9th level of key training, and his memory can be said to be photographic. He is the kind of person who can take the postgraduate entrance examination in politics after reading a book for a day. Therefore, he didn't spend much time to remember the startup methods of various devices. Finally, he put on a tight protective suit, carried a bunch of equipment and flew to the entrance of the cyclone. After arriving at the entrance, Wei Fan first looked at the cyclone above his head, and at this time the cyclone had been broken into a dark hole. Then, like a novice doctor who is prescribing medicine according to prescription, he put the equipment into the entrance one by one. Q1, open the left starter first, and press the blue button after the yellow light comes on. More than 10 minutes later, various equipment were successfully sent into the Shanghai. After finishing the work, Wei Fan did not leave, but carried a small base station and acted as a human relay at the entrance. On the other side, many devices began to collect information as soon as they were sent into the Shanghai. The first feedback came from the temperature sensing device. This set of equipment is equipped with a strong laser and sound wave ranging system, which can operate normally on the seabed or in dusty conditions. Therefore, less than half a minute after starting, it detected the maximum distance of the Shanghai. Of course, the result is definitely not a straight line. But in terms of preliminary judgment of the area of the Shanghai, the error of a few degrees of elevation angle can basically be ignored. In the helicopter cabin, Li Baoyan was staring at the information on the screen. The height is 137.7 meters, with a landing point as the east side. The distances in the other three directions are 4,136.9 meters, 1,928.3 meters, and 1,900 meters. There are also more than 20 measurement data in different directions, and the information is enough for model simulation. In other words, Shanghai is similar to a flat and short rectangular space with a square base and a slightly lower height. Academician Pan nodded and added, it may also be other irregular shapes that are slightly convex or concave. But overall there will not be much deviation. Li Baoyan thought for a while and said to Zhao Haiming, Xiao Zhao, control a device to go to the nearest space boundary and see what it is like. Space boundary, this has always been a controversial topic. At present, most of the discussions on space boundaries revolve around the universe, that is, whether the universe has boundaries. At present, we don't know whether space has boundaries, but the space we can observe has boundaries, that is, the observable universe. This conclusion is based on the fact that time has a beginning, and the actual observations are consistent with the theoretical speculation results. As for the universe outside observation, it may be finite or infinite. But things outside the light cone do not interfere with us. It is worth mentioning that there is no evidence that our position in the universe is special. The universe observed from any location should be similar to what we see. That is, the universe outside observation is consistent with the observable universe, and there is no space boundary in 3 dimensions. The general view at present is that the size of the entire universe is divided into 3 cases: positive curvature, no curvature, and negative curvature. These models can be derived by measuring the curvature of geodesics, similar to measuring the sum of internal angles by drawing triangles on the ground. However, the scale of the universe is so large that the current accuracy is not enough to detect it. So this issue often turns to religion or philosophy when discussing it, and various views are uneven. For example, some people will give you a sentence at any time, all appearances are false, and space is also illusory, so there is no inside or outside. So, The discussion of physics has turned into a discussion of Taoism. Sometimes, seeing this kind of words really makes your blood pressure rise suddenly, and you can't wait to punch his bald head. In fact, the problem of space is very simple, to put it bluntly. Mathematically, the infinity of space is a propositional question, which depends on the definition. Physically, the infinity of space is an empirical question, which depends on human ability. Originally, human ability was limited, so let alone the universe, even independent space had not been discovered. So there were a lot of quarrels, and many of them happened between top scientists. For example, Kip Thorne, the scientific consultant of Interstellar, once quarreled with someone, and finally killed the other person in anger at the age of 70. Ahem. In short, now the rabbits have discovered the Shanghai space. It means that in a sense, the local understanding of space will be greatly improved. However, it will take time for the sampling equipment to move forward, and the other equipment is also being started. Therefore, Li Baoyan and academician Pan took the opportunity to chat. A space covering nearly 20 square kilometers is still floating in the air. Pan, do you think this is naturally formed or excavated by man? Note, at the end of the month, I am asking for monthly tickets. Today, the plot is continuous for the sake of continuity. The amount is the amount of 3 updates. Please give me monthly tickets. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311, Inside the Heavenly Palace. Pan, do you think this space was formed naturally or was it excavated by humans? Academician Panjayan Wityu was stunned at first when he heard Li Baoyan's question, but then a hint of understanding emerged on his face. In fact, not only Li Baoyan, but academician Pan himself had also carefully considered this issue. He pondered for a while and said, Mr. Li, I personally think that it is unlikely that this heavenly palace, including the entire space, was completely excavated by manpower. I tend to believe that this space is a natural area that existed originally. Of course, the space may have been in an extremely chaotic initial state at the beginning, with no matter but only boundaries. Later, the ancient practitioners or Zhangdaoling transformed this area, and finally it became a heavenly palace. Because the concept of space-binding energy is actually similar to the nature of the teleportation array. 1 means that 2 can be born, 2 can be born from 3, and finally all things can be born. The civilization that can create this space completely out of thin air is obviously at the threshold of 3 in all things. Theoretically, as long as the energy is sufficient, creating space is basically not much different from copying and pasting. But according to the information we have collected during this period of time, except for Qingchang Mountain, it seems that no other entrances to other spaces have been found in the local area, and even spiritual energy and Yi particles have not been found. You know, even dinosaurs tens of millions of years ago have fossils, as academician Pan said. In the past few days, after confirming the news that there is a Shanghai over Qingchang Mountain, the core layer attached great importance to the explosion of Shanghai and launched the second round of sampling and collection across the country. At the same time, compared with the broad targets of the first round, the targets this time are much clearer and more detailed, that is, the famous mountains and rivers across the country. Although China has a vast territory, with an area of more than 9.6 million square kilometers. But apart from many urban entities and the 2 river basins, there are not many mountains with names, and it is not difficult to count them, at least for national power. In addition, the beam equipment has now clearly recorded the information of Y particles, and theoretically even 1 Y particle can be detected. Now it has been 8 days since Lin Ximing and others came to Qingchang Mountain, and the second round of famous mountain sampling has been carried out for more than half of the round. However, whether it is the Taimu Mountain in Fujian Province, Qian Mountain in southern Zhuangzi, or Lushan Mountain and Huangshan Mountain among the 3 mountains and 5 peaks, or Wudang and Longhu with a long heritage, no trace of spiritual energy and Yi particles has been found. Therefore, we can basically rule out the possibility that there are a large number of Taoist heavenly palaces or underground palaces in famous mountains and rivers. As for the possibility of foreign countries, to be honest, it is not very high. Because whether it is the system of spiritual energy or the figure of Zhang Daoling, They are all orthodox Chinese cultural images. Not to mention the witchcraft holy light in the West. Even the Takamagahara in Japan next door is obviously different from the practice overview that has been passed down in China since ancient times. If immortal and powerful immortal cultivator are just different names for the same concept in the cognitive field, then the ghosts and gods in Japan are completely different. In addition, the ancient Chinese ancestors actually had a sense of superiority over foreign countries due to inheritance, and barbarians was a word left over from ancient times. Therefore, in this case, if there are many relics discovered in China, it is not ruled out that there are really a few mysterious places like overseas fairy islands abroad. But now that more than half of the famous mountains in China have been turned over, only one heavenly palace in Qingchang Mountain has been found, so the possibility of relics abroad is naturally not high. Just like if a person's family is relatively well off, he may often help the homeless poor. But if he can't pay off his monthly loan, you ask him to buy a hamburger for the homeless every day after work? It is not ruled out that such people exist in real life, but it is really not very universal. Besides, even if there is really a Cheyenne going abroad, the rabbits can collect it on their territory, right? Now that half of the local area has been searched, only the Qinling, Kunlun, and Taihang mountains have not been searched. It can be said that the Qingchang Mountain Cheyenne going is the only copy that the rabbits have. Perhaps because he opened the conversation, Academician Pan rarely said a few more words. In fact, the problem of Cheyenne Gong is not only the questions you mentioned, but also includes a lot of unknown conditions. For example, where do the microorganisms that produce Y particles live? How did they appear? How did Cheyenne Gong break? These information are very important, but we currently know nothing about them. Looking at Academician Pan who threw out his questions, Li Baoyan also sighed with a heavy face. The same thing. After being exposed to the concept of cultivation in the Great Mo realm, the rabbits actually had no great resistance to discovering such cultivation relics in their native land. Anyway, even if there were ancient practitioners, they were only powerful human individuals, not innate immortals and gods. Under this premise, even if you are so powerful that you can break mountains and rivers with one finger, you are slowly grown from weak individuals, not innate inherent classes. But on the other hand, the problem diffracted by the Heavenly Palace is not just that there was once an extraordinary civilization in the native land, but more importantly, what happened behind it. Those collapsed ruins are definitely not what a healthy civilization should have. This is a judgment that any rare person can make. Even if the space was only borrowed by Zhang Daoling later, he shouldn't have left a pile of rotten stones there, right? So is it that the Heavenly Palace in Qingchang Mountain has changed for some reason, or is it that the civilization behind it has something wrong? The former is easy to say, but if it is the latter, it's a bit scary to think about it carefully. Of course, the road must be taken step by step, and the rabbits have just entered the Heavenly Palace. At least the basic information in the Cheyenne Gong should be collected clearly before the next step can be taken. While the two were talking, the detector just happened to arrive at the edge of the Cheyenne Gong. Considering the various complex situations that may occur in the Cheyenne Gong, the rabbit specially prepared a temperature-sensing detector. It is also a kind of current aviation front-end technology reserve, which is somewhat similar to this Huron vehicle. The average temperature on Mars is about 218 K, which is about -55. The lowest temperature in winter can reach -133, and the hottest temperature in summer is nearly 27 during the day. The temperature in the Cheyenne Gong is only more than 70 degrees below zero, which is a drizzle compared to the conditions on Mars. Therefore, this temperature-sensing detector not only moves very smoothly in the Cheyenne Gong, but also has a very high sampling accuracy. At this moment, the detector arrived at the boundary of the left area of the Cheyenne Gong. There are also many ruins on the ground of this boundary, but compared with the main hall of the Cheyenne Gong, the buildings here are obviously much lower. For example, in front of the left of the current position of the detector, you can see a pond that has long been dried up, with a lot of dust accumulated inside. Don't underestimate these dusts. As long as we can figure out the law of change of materials in the Cheyenne Gong, we can restore and determine the age of the bottom layer through technical means. Then Academician Pan Jianwei personally took the lead and controlled the detector to the edge of the pond. Looking at the gray border in the video, Academician Pan looked at several buttons on the console again. Then he hesitated for a few seconds and pressed a purple button. A moment later, the detector clicked, and something like a gun barrel appeared on the top, anti-harmony. Then, Zizzy, Water sprayed out. Note, I'm asking for monthly tickets. I'm going to code the second chapter now. I'll post as many as I can code today. I'm still short of 108 tickets. I want to draw a lottery. I'm an atheist, but sometimes I have to say that there may really be retribution in this world. A person in my hometown who sold masks at a 5-fold increase in price during the epidemic last year drowned while swimming in the wild yesterday. Many people in my hometown swim in the wild, but no one has died in several years. This year is the first time in several years, and the person who died was a scum. I wish God could open his eyes more often. Chapter 312, Inside the Heavenly Palace. That's right. The detector sprayed water. This is a special but not special water. The special thing is that it is not a liquid rich in special substances, but simply spring water from a mountain spring behind King Chang Mountain. What makes it special is that the instantaneous temperature of this water is 88.3 degrees. Students who are good at chemistry should remember that most substances expand when heated and contract when cooled, but water has a maximum density near 4 degrees Celsius. At this density, water has extremely high material stability. Its decomposition temperature is above 2000 degrees. In addition, students who have taken chemistry classes should remember another sentence: chemical reactions are actually the breaking of old bonds and the formation of new bonds. The whole bond of water requires more than 450 kJ-mole of energy to break, which is higher than the CH bond energy. Ho has a bond angle of 104.5 degrees, and the electron cloud is enriched in the O atom. Therefore, water is a large polar molecule, and there is a secondary bond that is very important to chemistry and biology, the hydrogen bond. Under the condition of 4 degrees Celsius, the specific heat capacity of water is almost the highest among common substances, and its surface tension is the highest except for metal liquids such as mercury. It has the highest melting and boiling points among molecules of the same molecular weight. Therefore, in the environment of Shanghai, water, which is common in life, has become the most suitable tentative material. The reason for the initial temperature of 88.3 is very simple. The temperature sensor fed back the temperature information in Shanghai at the beginning, and the average temperature was minus 62.1 degrees. Therefore, the main control console calculated the trajectory and cooling effect, and finally confirmed the most suitable injection position, upward angle and water outlet temperature of the detector. Finally, the value of 88.3 was obtained. This makes the entire detection process have the highest theoretical stability, even safer than lasers. The detector's nozzle power is sufficient, and the special upward mouth and pulsed water outlet speed ensure that the water flow will not condense into ice in the air. It looks like a thing that pees 3 feet in the wind, spraying water. This stream of water drew a beautiful parabola in the air and finally fell on the gray boundary. Then, splashing, all the water was bounced back and splashed onto the dry surface. Before it had time to freeze, it was absorbed by the cracked ground in an instant. Inside the helicopter cabin, looking at the scene in front of them, the expressions of Li Baoyan and Academician Pan Jian were solemn at the same time. Academician Pan's facial muscles couldn't help but tremble. It can be seen very clearly in the picture. The boundary that originally seemed to be composed of a thick gray fog did not produce any macroscopic deformation at the moment of contact with the water flow. The water flow looked like it hid a ball of solid black smoke and then bounced back directly. And judging from the splashing position, the rebound force of the boundary is much higher than that of an ordinary solid wall. It's like you splash water at a person, and that person condenses the water in front of him with a single hand, and then splashes it back at you. In other words, the space of the Shanghai has a clear boundary, and the outside is not a continuous and infinite void. Experts from other straight men's groups have discussed this before. Some experts believe that the boundary of Shanghai is impassable, but it is composed of a large number of void organizations, which may be related to some rules. But at present, this possibility should be wrong. There is no doubt that this is a very valuable discovery for the existing space theory. To put it bluntly, the value of this stream of water is equivalent to the research and speculation of space physics in the past 15 years. Because before this, whether it is domestic or foreign, all theoretical verifications have no examples to refer to. At the same time, as mentioned in the previous article, there are currently 3 types of judgments on the universe in the physics community: positive curvature, no curvature, and negative curvature. Let's talk about a concept that is easy to understand: positive curvature multiple rebound, no curvature regular rebound, negative curvature, no rebound, and even absorbed matter. Therefore, based on the water flow experiment, another result can be judged at present. Since the rebound of the water flow is much more violent than normal, the Shanghai space conforms to the positive curvature situation. As we all know, in the Riemann function, negative curvature makes the geodesic spread out, and positive curvature makes the geodesic tighten. In other words, if the cross-sectional curvature of a complete simply connected Riemann manifold is not positive everywhere, then it must be differentially homeomorphic to Rn. Therefore, once the geodesic is tightened, the fluid will also be tightened. In other words, the Shanghai space is a convergent space. This is the charm of physics. It is the same bucket of water. Ordinary people can only use it to wash their faces, writers can use it for hydrology, and physicists can use it to break through barriers. But thinking of this, Li Baoyan couldn't help but frown. Strange, if the Shanghai space is a convergent state, then where does the momentum of the center of mass system go? In Chinese terms, the meaning of the word system generally represents a collection of multiple combinations, which can be subdivided into multiple subsets. For example, there are various planets under the solar system, the physics department can be subdivided into various classes, and the rare human department can be divided into a large number of readers. The center of mass system refers to a system composed of multiple centers of mass. The momentum of the center of mass system is conserved when no external force does work. This is a theorem similar to some kind of cosmic rule. But now the space fluid is converging, so where does its momentum go when it converges? Academician Pan Jianwei on the side thought about it and tentatively proposed a possibility. He only heard him say, Mr. Li, judging from the current situation in space, could it be the two assumptions that the spacecraft hits the interstellar dust? That is, there is some unknown external force doing work, and the actual center of mass system is still in a conservation state. The spacecraft hits the interstellar dust, which is a very interesting assumption. Under this assumption, the dust part has no initial kinetic energy, and the spacecraft is sailing in space. When the dust hits the spacecraft, it is a completely inelastic collision. And there is a change in kinetic energy inside the system, there is a part of heat dissipation. Then the formula for the conservation of energy should be written as external work equals overall kinetic energy change plus internal heat dissipation. But when academician Pan finished speaking, Li Baoyan had no time to express his opinion. He couldn't help but frown first. It's not that he thought this speculation was wrong and immediately overturned it on the spot. But he suddenly had a very strange feeling in his heart. This feeling is indescribably strange, like something stuck in my heart, but when I try hard to catch it, I can't catch it. Uncomfortable JPG. Li Baoyan on the side did not notice the abnormality of academician Pan. After all, they were discussing the academic issue of center of mass momentum at this moment. External force? This is possible. This hypothesis is actually quite consistent with the space of Shanghai, because Shanghai absorbs nitrogen every day to react and generate Y particles, and energy conversion may not be a closed loop. Then he paused and said, Pan, let's continue to do the test, or focus on the boundary, and try to figure out its properties. Since it is confirmed that it is a positive curvature state, then this time we can be bolder and try photons and excited state particles. Photons are a very common particle, existing in every corner of life. For example, every time you turn off and open a small movie, countless photons are like cannonballs, shooting straight at your face. Photons are neutral particles, which have tiny fluctuations themselves. They are special substances that are visible in the macroscopic and magical in the microscopic. The photon beam on the detector this time is mainly used to detect the superposition state of the boundary, which is somewhat similar to the quantum erasure of the double-slit interference experiment. It uses the polarization of photons and the principle of quantum entanglement. Academician Pan and his team installed different media at the exit of the beam, a total of 4 types. When the photon passes through the exit, its polarization will change due to the presence of the medium. If this photon is in a quantum entangled state with a photon on the boundary or even outside the boundary, the state of the corresponding photon will also change accordingly. In this way, academician Pan and his team can collect certain information. However, the preparation of photons takes a certain amount of time, so academician Pan and his team first looked at other collected information. Note, I saw the news about the restriction of games for minors, and suddenly I want to know how many minors are among the readers of this book. Minors can leave a 1 here. The speed has dropped to 600 words per hour. It took me nearly 10 hours to type these 5,000 words today. I'm going to take a nap first. I don't need to wait for updates tonight. I may post them tomorrow. My biological clock is really weird now. I woke up at 12 o'clock when I said I would wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I feel groggy every time I sleep for 6 hours. By the way, I recommend a book, The Beginning, A Republic of China Plain by Lao Longju. It's super good, but I won't recommend it if it's not a masterpiece. Chapter 313, Inside the Heavenly Palace. This time, the rabbits sent a lot of equipment into the Shanghai, about 18 in total. Wei Fan ran 3 times to complete the task. Some of them were physical and chemical testing equipment such as temperature sensors, and some were ordinary samplers and cameras. Of course. The ordinary here is also relative to the scientific research perspective, which is also a kind of Versailles in a sense. Any of these equipment is worth more than 500,000 Chinese yuan, and some lens models are the type that camera enthusiasts will take off their pants when they see them. Therefore, while waiting for the photon to be ready, Academician Pan and Li Baoyan checked the status of some other equipment. The gas samplers are in normal condition, and the farthest one has reached the end of the northeast corner. In the helicopter cabin, Academician Pan looked at the small dots on the screen representing various devices and raised his eyebrows. Huh? The concentration of spiritual energy in the Shanghai is not low, 15.4%, which is higher than that of the Dhammo realm. However, the spiritual particles that can be absorbed at this concentration are still limited, not as good as RL-17. Li Baoyan came over to take a few glances and said, "It's true, but no matter what, this concentration of spiritual energy is already a very strange discovery in our country. I don't know if our detection equipment can trace the source of the spiritual energy." Academician Pan thought for a while and said, "It's hard to say, but I personally don't think it's a good idea. After all, the technology of gas tracing is not particularly mature at present, and there is still a long way to go. I worked in a project in Shanghai for a while. Now the gas tracing is basically to identify multiple suspect points in the calibration area to obtain the first position information. Then use the diffusion distance corresponding to the maximum concentration of the gas in the air, the atmospheric dilution factor from each suspicious point to the monitoring point, and the weight of each suspicious point to make a Gaussian probability model. If we can keep the pressure in the space constant, it is easy to say, but now this kind of convergent space with positive curvature, I am not optimistic. Maybe we need to arrange people to enter the space for detection in person." As Academician Pan said, at present, the gas measurement and traceability system is relatively limited, and it is relatively mature under quantitative conditions, that is, the standard set of formulas. But once there are more variables, this traceability method is relatively limited. Therefore, before humans carry equipment into the Shanghai, they want to detect the source of the spiritual energy. The possibility is indeed not too high. Compared with the difficulty of tracing the source of spiritual energy, Y particles are much easier. Shanghai absorbs nitrogen to generate Y particles every day, and the time is around 5:55 in the morning. As long as you are well prepared, it is not difficult to lock the generation area of Y particles. While Academician Pan and Li Baoyan were chatting in the base camp of the Magic City, at this time, many experts gathered together to analyze the information collected by the sampling equipment. After all, the detection of Shanghai space covers many fields, and it is impossible for all the analysis to be completed by Academician Pan and others. Academician Pan and Li Baoyan are not so stubborn. As the saying goes, every profession has its own specialty. It's like if you asked Newton to write a poem, even if he can write a few words, his level is probably about the same as Jia Qianqian. Therefore, support from other fields is very necessary. There are a total of 30 experts gathered this time, and the location is in the combat center next to the light gate. Their expertise fields include literature and science. About half of them are talents preparing to go to the Dhammo world in the new batch, and the other half are experts temporarily transferred back from the Dhammo world. Dai Chaohong and Man Ying are among them. However, the two of them did not speak at this time, but sat quietly aside, listening to the analysis of an archaeological expert. In the pictures sent back by the detector, the main hall collapsed and was covered with dust and fragmented. But through the analysis of the ruins, it is not difficult to get the pattern and imprint of the overall building. For example, in this picture of the building on the left side of the main hall, the center of the picture is a roof with a completeness of about 70%. We can see that the connecting section of this roof is very wide, which shows that its structure and decoration account for a great deal of the original building. The shape of this roof is stretched and beautiful, with a gentle slope. The roof is mostly straight down, and there are few reverse buildings. The old expert enlarged the picture while talking, pointed to a corner and continued, here, here and here. The eaves and ridges at the above locations are mostly straight lines, and there are few examples of curved ridges and warps. Only at the end of the ridge is slightly raised, decorated and emphasized with tubular tiles and tiles. This is a very typical feature of the roof of Eastern Han Dynasty buildings, and it is an architectural school that emerged after Emperor Guangwu Liu Xiu established Luoyang as the capital. Qin Zhendong, who was sitting on the main seat, heard this and said thoughtfully, "Professor Wang, do you mean that this main hall should have been built in the Eastern Han Dynasty?" Professor Wang nodded slightly, looking confident. "Yes, I think it is very likely." In other words, the main hall is most likely a product of the same period or era as Zhang Daoling. It is even very likely that it was built by Zhang Daoling, and this just fits the information we have. As soon as Professor Wang finished speaking, Dai Chaohong, who was standing beside him, suddenly raised his hand. "Boss Qin, I have something to say." Qin Zhendong looked at him and said with a smile, "Professor Dai, if you have anything to say, just say it." Dai Chaohong stood up and nodded to Qin Zhendong and Professor Wang. Then he called up another picture and said, "I have no objection to Professor Wang's view on the construction period of the main hall, but I don't know if you have found a problem. The buildings in the Xiangong have almost no ancient Sichuan and Shu architectural style." Professor Wang, who was originally quite proud of his discovery, was stunned when he heard this. He immediately thought of something and looked at the many photos. After a while, his face suddenly became serious. Indeed, white walls and green tiles are typical characteristics of the Wei style, but there is no trace of the Sichuan style. It's abnormal, too abnormal. Qingchang Mountain is located in the northwest of the Xianfu Plain and is deeply influenced by the culture of Shizhong. For example, there was a famous rumor in ancient times, the Shu road is difficult to travel, and there are many sword immortals in Sichuan and Shu. And the Qingchang sword immortal is a typical representative of the Sichuan and Shu sword immortal. There is also a very famous novel called Shushan, which is also an early online classic. Although the Shushan in reality does exist, that is, Wau Mountain in Hongaya County, Maishan City, on the west edge of the Sichuan Basin. But the sect background of this Shushan novel is actually Qingcheng. In addition, the architectural pattern in Qingchang Mountain also has a strong Shizhong cultural color. For example, the roof of the Qingchang Mountain Gate has a deep peach eaves, often protruding to 2 steps. Hanging mountaintops, small green tiles, through beam frames, mud walls, and large protrusions can be seen everywhere. In addition, the fireproof wall of the main hall of Qingchang Mountain is also made of hollow bucket wall. The eaves are pointed, which is a typical Sichuan Shu architectural style. However, the style of Xiangong architecture in the photos sent back by the probe is far from this. Now I have to sleep twice a day, 4 or 5 hours each time, and I feel drowsy all day long. Is there any solution? I wake up naturally after sleeping for about 4 hours, and I can't fall asleep no matter what I do. It's too awkward. Chapter 314, Inside the Heavenly Palace. It can be clearly seen in the images sent back by the detector. Whether it is the ruins near the main hall or the few relatively intact low-rise buildings, there is no trace of the ancient Sichuan Shu architectural style. On the contrary, there are many white walls and green tiles mentioned by Professor Wang before, and there are also a large number of horsehead wall style buildings. The horsehead wall is the most typical representative style of Huzhou architecture. Huzhou architecture is one of the most important schools of ancient Chinese architecture and has an extremely important status. Of course, it is a general term, not just the architecture of Huzhou province. Huzhou architecture is mainly popular in the Xinan River Basin, in the upper reaches of the Qiantang River, Wuzhou, Guozhou and Panhuzhou areas in western Zhejiang. That is, the eastern part of the Chinese territory. The above-mentioned areas are very far away from Sichuan and Shu, separated by several provinces. Even in this era, the two places are separated by a 4-hour flight. Not to mention the ancient times. At the same time, the architectural design industry is a typical local snake business, and few masters of other schools will go to other people's territory to be Jianglong. Now, it can be basically confirmed that the age of Qingcheng Xiangong is in the same period as Zhang Daoling. That is, the early and middle stages of the Eastern Han Dynasty. In this era, why did Zhang Daoling build a typical Wei-style building in the Taoist temple in Sichuan? This question is not like the kind of reading questions in the Chinese language test. Lu Xun obviously wanted to sleep and wrote good night. As a result, those people forcibly made up some anger at the old times and expectation of the dawn of dawn. The abnormal architectural style of Xiangong is a real problem that cannot be ignored. It is definitely not excessive imagination or sensitivity. It has been mentioned before. The area of Xiangong space is about more than 10 square kilometers. Among them, the area of the building is at least more than 6 or 7 square kilometers, that is, more than 9,000 acres. The area of ordinary local universities is only more than 3 or 4,000 acres. In addition to the agricultural universities with their own training bases, other larger universities are about 5 or 6,000 acres. In other words, before the collapse of the Xiangong building, the area is at least equal to that of 2 ordinary universities. Let's not talk about what Comrade Zhang's motivation was for building such a large building. After all, who knows, maybe he was possessed by Liu Bei and wanted to enjoy himself? Just talking about such a large building, its construction style is definitely not easy to decide. Looking at Professor Wang with a frown, Qin Zhendong on the main seat suddenly asked, "Professor Wang, where were the Wei-style buildings mainly distributed in the Eastern Han Dynasty?" Hearing Qin Zhendong's question, Professor Wang thought for a while and said, "The development of Huzhou architecture is closely related to the emergence of Huzhou merchants, and the two complement each other. The earliest period of Huzhou merchants was the Tang Dynasty, and they began to grow in the southern Song Dynasty. Therefore, before the Tang Dynasty, in today's words, Huzhou architecture was far from being out of the circle. And most of the Huzhou architecture was confined to Huzhou province." A thoughtful look appeared on Qin Zhendong's face, and then he said to Chang Qixiang, the director of the General Affairs Office beside him, "Comrade Qixiang, please check which famous mountains and rivers are in Huzhou province. I'm not good at geography, and I only know that there is a Huangshan mountain in Huzhou." Chang Qixiang nodded and quickly checked, "Boss Qin, there are many tourist attractions in Huzhou province, among which the most famous are 3 mountains." "Which 3? One of them is the Huangshan mountain you mentioned, and the other 2 are Jiuhu mountain and Xiansu mountain." Qin Zhendong touched his chin when he heard this and said, "These mountains have been carefully inspected in the secondary sampling, and no abnormalities were found. Could it be that the buildings in the Xiangong have no actual relationship with Huzhou, and are purely the work of some Huzhou craftsmen? The design of the Xiangong was done by Lao Zhang's Huzhou acquaintances or Huzhou craftsmen who occasionally traveled from Sichuan and Shu." Although this statement can barely explain the style of the building, it always makes people feel that it is not so strong. At this time, Chang Qixiang suddenly discovered something. "Boss Qin, Huzhou province has a special geological area in addition to the Huangshan peaks." "Huh? What area?" A word suddenly popped out of Chang Qixiang's mouth. "The end of the Qinling Mountains." Then he paused and continued, "The Qinling Mountains start from Kunlun in the west, and the easternmost end passes through the southern part of Huzhou province. The entire Qinhui line divides Huzhou province in 2 from the middle, forming the diverse social environment of Huzhou today. And the Qinling Mountains. Our secondary sampling has only explored a small part of the area, Qinling Mountains. One of the most important mountain systems in China. The Qinling Mountains in a narrow sense are limited to the mountains between the southern part of Shanxi province and the Weihe River and the Hanjiang River. It is bounded by the Bo River and the Danjiang River Valley in the east and ends at the Jialing River in the west. The Qinling Mountains in a broad sense start from Kunlun in the west, pass through Longnan and southern Shanxi in the middle, and end at Zhangbeiling near Hubei, Henan, Anhui and Bengbu in the east. It is the watershed between the Yangtze River and the Yellow River. The Qinhui line we usually talk about refers to the Qinling line in a broad sense. From a geographical point of view, the Qinling Mountains are the dividing line between the north and the south. It blocks the water vapor from the south and the cold air from the north. In addition, the Qinhui line is also the zero isotherm in January, the 800 mm annual precipitation line, the boundary between the warm temperate zone and the subtropical zone, the boundary between the humid zone and the semi-humid zone, the boundary between the temperate deciduous broad-leaved forest and the subtropical evergreen broad-leaved forest, the boundary between dryland agriculture and paddy field agriculture, the boundary between the subtropical monsoon climate and the temperate monsoon climate, temperate continental climate, The boundary between 3 crops a year, 2 crops a year, and 3 crops in 2 years, 1 crop a year, etc. These names are almost the same as the Dragon Mother. In terms of humanities, the Qinling Mountains are even more mysterious. It is said that there are 2 dragon veins in China. One is Kunlun, the ancestor of all mountains. The other is the Qinling Mountains. Fuxi, the ancestor of humanities, and Nuwa, who created humans, were both born in the Qinling Mountains. At the same time, the Qinling Mountains are also the birthplace of the Qin dynasty. It is said that Zhang Ziya once fished at the foot of the Qinling Mountains to gain enlightenment and wait for King Wen of Zhou. Lao Zi's Tao Te Ching was also written in the Qinling Mountains and began to spread from here. It is no exaggeration to say that one Qinling Mountain represents half of the history of China. The end of the Qinling Mountains ends in Huzhou province, with only a small tail staying in the famous belt Jiangsu. If the Qinling Mountains are really a dragon vein, then Huzhou province is undoubtedly the tail of the dragon vein. Therefore, after hearing that the tail of the Qinling Mountains passes through Huzhou province, Qin Zhendong's expression suddenly became solemn. Now the completion rate of the national secondary sampling has exceeded 50%, but no other space similar to the Qingcheng Palace has been found. If there are any other places in the remaining areas of China where such a space relic may exist, then the Qinling Mountains are definitely one of the top options. It's just that due to the vast area of the Qinling Mountains, it is difficult to get a result for a while. At present, the buildings in the palace have obvious Wei-style colors, and the Qinling Mountains happen to exist in Huzhou. Qin Zhendong always feels that there seems to be some connection between the two. And at this moment, Professor Wang suddenly thought of something and raised his hand. Note, 4 more chapters of 10,000 words today, please vote. Yesterday a classmate said that the aura concentration of 15 is not low, and the rabbit's is only 17. You are not reading the book carefully. 117 means the aura concentration is 38.8%, and 17% can be absorbed. The former is the aura concentration, and the latter is the aura concentration that can be absorbed, which is called the aura particle concentration. Chapter 315, Inside the Heavenly Palace. Professor Wang is a senior heritage conservationist from the Ancient Architecture Research Institute of Tongji University. People in their field must have a very rich knowledge reserve and a fast brain reaction. For example, when seeing a certain carving, you must think of what characteristics it meets in a short time, so as to quickly identify its origin. Therefore, after hearing Chang Qixiang mention Qinling, Professor Wang suddenly thought of another thing. Something that is not particularly well known in the industry. He raised his hand and said to Qin Zhendong, Secretary Qin, speaking of Qinling, I remembered an unsolved mystery in the history of ancient architecture. Qin Zhendong was immediately interested when he heard it. Oh? What unsolved mystery? Professor Wang organized his words and said, everyone should know that the center of Qinling is Shanxi province. There is a place called Fenghuang Ancient Town in Shanxi province. It is an ancient town, not the Fenghuang Ancient City in Hunan province. This ancient city has a relatively small unsolved mystery, that is, almost all of its buildings are in Wei style, with white walls and green tiles, and horsehead walls everywhere. This ancient town is the only large-scale gathering place of Wei-style buildings in Shanxi province. You know, Shanxi province and Huzhou province are separated by a large bowl of stewed noodles. Under the ancient background and industry barriers, it is still difficult for a large-scale gathering place of school buildings to appear across provinces. Although Fenghuang Ancient Town was an important town for north-south trade in history, it actually has little to do with Wei merchants. The Qin merchants in Shanxi province were also very famous in ancient times. However, the study of ancient architecture is relatively unpopular, and nowadays, almost no one is applying for the major of cultural heritage preservation. Therefore, over time, the attention to this unsolved mystery has not been high, and even the locals don't know about it. Professor Wang's tone revealed a little disappointment. It is indeed as he said. The major of cultural heritage preservation has become less and less popular in recent years. Many universities have cancelled the major of cultural heritage preservation, and the funding has become less and less. Even many professors have no choice but to change their careers. However, Professor Wang also understood that this occasion is not suitable for complaining about those social trends, so he quickly adjusted his mood and continued, I personally think that if we need to study the relationship between Huzhou architecture and Qinling Mountains, Fenghuang Ancient Town may be a good starting point. As Professor Wang said, Fenghuang Ancient Town is a special example that has been difficult to explain clearly in the field of cultural heritage preservation for many years. If a similar situation occurs in a certain area of Chang'an, it is normal. After all, it is the ancient capital of 13 dynasties, and it is reasonable that the powerful and wealthy like Huzhou architecture at a certain stage. But Fenghuang Ancient Town is different. It is an ancient trade hub located in Shangluo, southern Shaanxi, deep in the mountains. To be honest, under the background conditions of ancient times, the trade value of this area is not low, but the cultural value is just that. Moreover, this is considered a base camp of Qin merchants. And the footprints of Huzhou merchants in history have never left a deep mark here. There are a large number of Qin merchant-style buildings in Taishu County, to which Fenghuang Ancient Town belongs, but only this small piece of land below has a unique style. This is just like a professional law firm that actually opened a King of Glory section, which is simply full of disobedience. Now with the possible connection between Qinling, Huzhou architecture, and different space, Professor Wang couldn't help but think of this ancient town. Then Qin's Hendong nodded slightly. No problem, I will report this matter to the core layer. If nothing unexpected happens, our search direction may be biased towards Huzhou and Fenghuang Ancient Town. Although he is not sure whether the Xiangong ruins are related to Qinling even now, he doesn't know whether there is a different space in Qinling. But as the saying goes, no matter whether there is a date or not, it is better to try 2 or 3 times. This entry point is much better than blindly searching. Qinling Mountains can be called the dragon vein of China, just like the spine of the human body. In addition to its very special location, its own land area is not small. Therefore, if we sweep it in the usual way, it is estimated that it will take at least several months to sweep the entire mountain range. After discussing the differences in architectural styles, many experts analyzed some other information one after another. Finally, it was determined that the historical background of the main hall was in the Eastern Han Dynasty, and it was accurate to about 80 to 100 years ago. As for questions like why the palace was built so big, it involves the subjective will of the builders, and a certain cultural background is required to make a judgment. Not long after the experts reached a consensus, Lin Ziming from Qingchang Mountain sent new news. Academician Pan's experimental photons are ready, and entanglement observation can be officially carried out. At this moment, in the helicopter cabin, a device with a specification of about 2x3 has been lifted and placed at the entrance of the cabin. This is a photon polarization beam-meter. The size is not large or small among indoor equipment, but it is extremely difficult to operate. Its square shape is somewhat like a coffin board, and it is often used to do many strange but subversive experiments, so many scientific researchers prefer to call it Newton's tomb. Its function is as its name suggests, which is a device used to conduct polarization state experiments. As we all know, from a classical image, light is a transverse wave, and the vibration direction perpendicular to the propagation direction has 2 degrees of freedom. In quantum mechanics, roughly speaking, due to the superposition principle of quantum states, only 2 mutually orthogonal directions are needed as the basis of the vibration direction to superimpose any polarization state. Well, the orthogonality here is not a position, but a state. The polarization of photons is generally explained by the vibration direction of light waves, that is, the spin of photons determines the polarization of light. At the same time, in the context of positive curvature, Rn is greater than 1 and infinite. Therefore, in theory, as long as the photon is entangled with a boundary, the device will be able to observe it. Unless the boundary is independent of time and space. This is a very, very important experiment, and it is also the first time in human history that a microscopic particle is used to anchor an entangled state. To be honest, even academician Pan Jianwei himself didn't know what would happen, or what data would be detected. The outer universe? Perturbation mapping? Or some strange phase transition? Or did the photons disappear without causing any ripples? This is something that even Einstein, Planck and Dirac could not confirm, and they didn't even know where to start their guesses. It is even possible that the boundary is beyond the observable universe. When the photons representing the existing rules collide with some unknown rules, it is possible that a certain law of the entire original universe will change in the next second. For example, all cats suddenly become catgirls and come to you to repay their gratitude. This is indeed something that may happen, which is what is commonly known as opening a blind box. After debugging the equipment, academician Pan suddenly stretched out his arm in front of Li Bian. Mr. Li, look, Goosebumps are coming out. Li Bayan also rolled up his sleeves when he heard this, and there were also many goosebumps on his arms. Same as before, the two looked at each other and laughed. It was not the excitement and unrestrainedness of facing death, but the excitement and joy of the unknown. This is an experiment destined to be included in textbooks, both in value and nature. Not to mention academician Pan and Li Bayan. Even this Z18 and Wei Fan, who is responsible for the hard labor, are destined to occupy a place in the textbook. Then academician Pan exhaled and said to Wei Fan, "Chief Wei, thank you for your trouble." Wei Fan smiled and waved his hand. "Well, it's just a small matter. We are old acquaintances." Academician Pan, "You don't have to be so polite." As he said, he pulled up the measuring optical fiber with one hand, flew directly to the entrance, and stuffed it into the cave. Opposite the entrance, a tiny mobile port robot that had been waiting here for a long time took the initiative to fix the optical fiber, and then slowly drove to the edge. In the previous preparation process, a sufficient length of optical fiber had been placed in the cabin on the ground. This kind of optical fiber is very thin, and a length of nearly 3 kilometers is only as big as a coffin board, which can be easily stuffed into the cabin. As for the robot behind the entrance, it is even simpler. Although its size is not big, it is actually fully functional and can operate normally under various complex conditions. Not to mention -60 degrees, it can still work in an environment of -120 degrees. This device is an auxiliary mobile output terminal, which is somewhat similar to the launch platform for launching satellites. It plays a role of fixing and calibration. In fact, it can not only be used to emit photons, but also other negative charges. After all, the rabbits did not know that space was a positive curvature environment at the beginning, so they simply put all the equipment that could be used in the 3 curvature states. Click, 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 the wheels of the port robot rolled over the gravel on the ground, and after traveling for about 10 minutes, it finally came to the border on the left. After everything is ready, the detection begins. Note, the remaining 2 updates may be posted around 6 a.m. tomorrow. I will stay up late tonight to deal with rice prevention. Chapter 316. Look what I found. Considering the curiosity of some students who are not familiar with this subject, I will explain the concept of photons, or quantum entanglement, in the most popular way possible. Basically, as long as you can understand the text, you should be able to understand it. First, let's give an example. Suppose 2 identical disks that are stationary next to each other in space are blown apart by a bomber named Hao. As a result, the 2 of them begin to rotate. After they fly very far, we capture one of the disks and measure it. And we find that its angular velocity of rotation is w. Then we can immediately know that the angular velocity of the other disk must be w. Because according to the law of conservation of angular momentum, the sum of the angular momentum of the 2 disks must be 0, so the angular velocities of their rotation must be opposite. That is, w and w cancel each other out. Quantum entanglement is somewhat similar. When a pair of quantum entangled photons fly very far in opposite directions, we capture one of the photons. It is measured that its polarization direction is counterclockwise. Then at this moment, we can know that the polarization direction of the other photon far away is clockwise. Seeing this, some people may think that quantum entanglement does not seem to be anything special, so why is it discussed so much? What is the difference between the experiment of quantum entanglement and the experiment in the classical world mentioned above? The most important difference is that in the classical world, the state of the 2 disks is determined at the moment after the explosion. No matter when and where we measure, we will get the same result. But in the experiment of quantum entanglement, when 2 photons fly in opposite directions, the polarization direction of each photon is not determined. Instead, it is in a quantum state where there is a 50% probability of clockwise polarization and a 50% probability of counterclockwise polarization. The result of your measurement has a 50% probability of clockwise polarization and a 50% probability of counterclockwise polarization. The state of this photon can only be determined when you measure it, and it is a completely probabilistic event. What does this mean? Here comes the most critical point. That is to say, when you measure one of the photons, the state of this photon collapses into, for example, clockwise polarization. The state of another photon in a distant place collapses into a certain counterclockwise polarization at the same time. It seems that there is a connection between the 2 photons that can surpass the speed of light, allowing them to reach a consensus instantly. The specific experimental process is that the entangled photon pair uses the spontaneous parametric down conversion of the second type of BBO crystal to produce two entangled photon pairs with orthogonal polarization states. Then use the analyzer and single photon counter to measure, and it can be completed. There are still many related papers, so I won't go into details here, and there is no need to understand too much. Of course. Maybe some students will ask a deeper question: how do you know that the state of the quantum is uncertain before measurement? Can't it be objectively determined? That is, this photon here has long been clockwise polarized, and the other photon is counterclockwise polarized. It's just that their states are unknown before we observe. This involves a superposition state problem. Bell's inequality combined with experimental results proves that the quantum is in a superposition state before being observed. What does this mean? That is to say, the same photon may be clockwise polarized when you measure it for the first time. But if you change the basis vector, the second time it will be counterclockwise polarized. For example, there are two refrigerators in front of you, with an egg in A and a piece of beef in B. The first time you open A, you find an egg, and you know that there must be beef on the B side without looking at B. But when you close A and open it again, the second time it turns into beef, and you did nothing else except closing the door. The third time it turns back into an egg. After repeating this over and over again, the probability of beef and eggs appearing is 50%. The only thing that remains unchanged is that after determining that there is a certain object in A, there must be another object on the B side. Of course. The so-called popular statement also means that it is not rigorous enough, so there must be some difference between theory and practice. But in terms of nature, the examples given are basically the same as the experimental situation, which is enough. After all, everyone does not need to do experiments or exams. In addition, the quantum teleportation studied by academician Pan and his team is based on this rule. That is, if I say a 0 character here, you can immediately get a 1 character at superluminal speed. Even if they are millions of light years apart, entanglement will occur in an instant. It's just that the transmission of information requires the carrier of classical channels, so it can only approach the speed of light at most, which does not violate the theory of relativity. The site returned to the helicopter cabin. After everything was ready, academician Pan made a gesture of invitation to Li Bayan, Mr. Li, you will start the equipment. As a student who Li Bayan had taught briefly as a substitute, academician Pan knew that the lifelong wish of this nearly 70-year-old man was to observe space once. Or it could be said that this was the dream of every physicist. There was almost no risk in the experimental process, but even if they died immediately after seeing the results, there would still be countless people willing to sacrifice their lives. Li Bayan nodded to academician Pan and walked to the side of the equipment table. This old academician, who had hardly fought for a fame and fortune in his life, did not choose to give up this time, because he was also one of the countless physicists. Then he took a deep breath and pressed the button. It was mentioned before that the propagation speed of photons in classical channels would not exceed the speed of light. But in reality, that speed is actually not much different from the speed of light for ordinary people. It's all a blink of an eye. Therefore, when Li Bayan just pressed the start button, the screen showed feedback almost instantly. A photon was reflected by the spatial light modulator placed on the image plane of the crystal and displayed as a phase object, then collected in a single-mode optical fiber, and finally detected by a single photon avalanche diode. The threshold frames obtained by the ICCD camera on the microorbit were directly added, and 4 independent quantum entangled images soon appeared on the screen. They corresponded to the 4 directions of Greek letter theta 2 equals 0 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees. At the same time, the computer quickly defined a circular region of interest along the edge of the phase circle object in each image. Academician Pan quickly came to the side of the main control screen and took a few glances. Mr. Li, the 4 parallel images of the phase circle of different parts of the photosensitive array have come out. Do you want to accumulate them now? Li Bayan hesitated for a while, shook his head and said, no hurry, wait a little longer. Just like the first hot water in a kettle that has not been used for a long time is often discarded, the first test results in scientific research are often ignored. After 30 seconds, the beam results in ARM 2 were updated. This time, Li Bayan spoke decisively. Zio Pan, start the accumulation calculation. Academician Pan nodded and typed a certain key on the keyboard. Soon, the accumulation phase appeared. This is an accumulation phase with 4 colors. The 4 colors are red, yellow, purple and green. The red, purple and green represent the experimental photons, negative charges and electrons respectively. But the yellow. The moment he saw it, Academician Pan's pupils suddenly shrank. How is this possible? Then he raised his head suddenly and said to Li Bian, Mr. Li, there are a lot of positrons at the edge of space. Note, I derived the experimental process myself for an afternoon, and it should be fine, but the calculation of the 45-degree phase is a bit troublesome, so I won't list the formula. Chapter 317 Some Truths. In the chemistry and physics textbooks of the 9-year compulsory education, a basic concept is basically mentioned. Positively charged particles are called cations, while electrons are negatively charged. An electron carries a negative charge, and a proton carries a positive charge. The amount of electricity they carry is the smallest unit of electricity. The scientific term is elementary charge, and the value is 1.610 cap-19 C. For the high school knowledge level, this concept is not wrong. But in reality, there are positively charged electrons in the world. It is a kind of antimatter. Before talking about antimatter, it is important to distinguish between antimatter and dark matter. Many friends easily confuse these two concepts. In fact, antimatter and dark matter are two different concepts, and their similarities mainly lie in the names. In a loose sense, the actual relationship between the two is similar to that between humans and pigs. That is, there is no relationship. Antimatter is a macroscopic concept, and antimatter is composed of antiparticles. Antiparticles are a concept proposed in the development of quantum mechanics. Everyone is familiar with the Schrödinger equation in quantum mechanics. Of course, the name Schrödinger should be familiar. After all, Schrödinger's cat is already a popular joke. But the Schrödinger equation is actually only applicable when the energy is relatively low, and it has certain limitations. When the energy is high, the relativistic effect needs to be considered. Later, a well-known student named Dirac appeared in the history of physics, and he considered the special theory of relativity. He generalized the Schrödinger equation to high-energy situations and finally obtained the Dirac equation. After calculation, Dirac found that this equation has two solutions, corresponding to positive energy and negative energy. Positive energy is easy to understand. From 0 to positive infinity, a particle can have any positive energy. The energy corresponding to the negative energy solution is from 0 to negative infinity. If the particle exists in a negative energy state, then the electron may jump from a high energy state to a low energy state. That is, radiate photons and lose energy. This is the antiparticle, or antimatter. Dirac predicted the existence of the positron, and later another person, Anderson, discovered it in an experiment. In the end, both of them won the Nobel Prize, and the positron was also the first antimatter discovered by humans. In addition, hole-type carriers in semiconductors, positrons in vacuum, and holes near the Fermi surface in metals are actually derived in the same way. Of course, LSP may only notice holes, flows, and vacuums when seeing the above line of words. There is no hope, wait for death, goodbye. Ahem. The sight returns to the helicopter cabin. At this moment, Li Bian and Academician Pan both frowned at the same time, obviously encountering a problem. Strange. Too strange, Li Bian frowned, checking the observation report over and over again, with a strong puzzlement on his face. Why are positrons detected at the boundary of space? Is the so-called boundary a static field? Beside him, Academician Pan also showed a similar expression. He pulled at his already sparse hair, counted on his fingers, and said, there are not many reactions that can generate positrons. There are only a few in general categories. In addition to the Greek letter beta reaction, there are only a few weak interaction processes and the first branch of the PP chain reaction that can generate positrons. Oh, right. There is also a major nuclear reaction in a star that will release positrons, but it can't be that the other side of the space boundary is the heart of Higson, right? And then it seems that there is nothing, etc. As he said this, he suddenly thought of something, turned his head abruptly, and stared at Li Bian. Mr. Li, lightning. There is also lightning. Li Bian was stunned at first, and then his eyes widened. That's right. In addition to the reactions mentioned by Academician Pan, there is another reaction that will release positrons. That is Bremsstrahlung. That is the reaction that generates lightning. Everyone should have seen thunderstorms, especially if you have paid attention to Xiao Jingtang and Xiao Longwang. When it rains, the high-speed electrons in the thundercloud layer will collide with other particles to slow down, and with deceleration, there will naturally be energy loss. This is a very basic concept. In Bremsstrahlung, the reduced kinetic energy of high-speed electrons is emitted in the form of gamma rays. Gamma rays hit certain atoms in the atmosphere, knocking out a fast neutron, and that atom will become a certain isotope. This type of isotope is unstable and will undergo Greek letter beta plus decay. A proton in the nucleus of the isotope atom becomes a neutron, a neutrino and a positron. Finally, the positron annihilates with a normal electron and emits gamma rays again. In fact, this is also the principle of positron emission tomography, or PET. PET injects nitrogen isotopes into the human body together with fructose, and the human body will metabolize the radioactive fructose. In this way, the cancerous parts with high metabolic activity will emit more gamma rays in response. In Bremsstrahlung, the atom in the atmosphere that is hit by gamma rays is called nitrogen. That is the isotope called nitrogen-13. Does this name sound familiar? That's right. What cyclones inhale every day is nitrogen. Think of this. Li Baiyan turned around and said to his assistant Zhao Ziming, Zhao, please check it quickly. How much nitrogen is there near the boundary, and how much gamma rays are measured? Zhao Ziming nodded quickly and began to operate with both hands quickly. Understood, I will check it now. The detection method of nitrogen and gamma rays is very simple, and it can be completed without even additional equipment. After about 7 or 8 minutes, Zhao Ziming looked up excitedly. Mr. Li, the results are out. The amount of sedimentation near the edge of the space is 88 kilograms per hectare, and the gamma ray measurement is 99.8 kilojoules per square meter. Academician Pen smacked his lips and said, wow, 99.8? If it grows a few times, it will be enough to cause the extinction of an area as large as an island country. Then he thought about it carefully, looked at Li Baiyan, and said, Mr. Li, if nothing unexpected happens, we can already deduce the context of certain situations. Xiangguang space absorbs a large amount of nitrogen every morning. After entering the space, these nitrogens pass through the boundary and undergo Bremsstrahlung radiation, releasing positrons and a large amount of heat, providing a sufficient living environment for the microorganisms in the space. The remaining part of the nitrogen reacts with the microorganisms to generate a large number of Y particles. These Y particles escape from the gap in the space, forming the unique cold environment of Qingchang Mountain. As for the reason why the reaction occurs at 5:55 in the morning every day, it is probably because only at that time will high-speed electrons collide from outside the boundary. Academician Pan was talking, and suddenly frowned again. Li Baiyan noticed his abnormality and asked, Zhao Pan, have you thought of anything? Academician Pan hesitated for a while, but decided to express his feelings. Mr. Li, I always feel that something is wrong. With such a large gamma ray flow, the number of Y particles generated in theory should not be so small. And the conservation of momentum of the center of mass system we talked about before is also the same. As a top physics expert, Academician Pan is still very sensitive to numbers. The energy level of 99.8 kilojoules per square meter, in theory, if it is expanded 10 times, it will be enough to destroy the group of people next door who are not living a good life. Even with the current part of the energy level, it is not difficult to destroy some northern sea ice. But such a huge energy, but only generated more than 10 square kilometers of Y particles? This is obviously not right. And at this moment, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed through Academician Pan's mind. He suddenly looked at the cyclone, and a surprising idea suddenly emerged from his mind. Mr. Li, I think I have thought of a possibility. What possibility? Academician Pan looked at him and said word by word, that is, this space is actually a space bag. Note, 2 chapters with 6,200 words, there will be more later, so it's not too much to give some monthly votes? The answer to the big thing mentioned before is revealed. Who guessed it right? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318 Everything Makes Sense. Space bag, inside the helicopter cabin. Hearing Academician Pan's words, Li Baoyan was slightly stunned at first. Then he thought of something, pointed to a small gray bag on Wei Fan's waist and said, "Is it the one on Patriarch Wei?" Academician Pan nodded and said, "That's right. To be precise, what Patriarch Wei has is a storage bag. It is a simplified version of the space bag, and there is a certain difference in volume. However, it is exactly the same as the space bag in principle. There is no difference. When we were discussing the conservation of momentum in the center of mass system before, I once proposed an idea. Do you still remember it?" Hearing this, Li Baoyan couldn't help but look up at the sky in the upper right corner. This is a typical recollection action. After a while, he said, "You think there is some unknown external force in the Shanghai space doing work, but the center of mass system is still in a state of momentum conservation." Academician Pan nodded very affirmatively and explained, "Yes, that's the sentence. In fact, I felt a little strange at the time, as if I had encountered this situation somewhere before. But I couldn't remember it when I thought about it carefully. It was not until just now that I realized that this is the situation inside the space bag." In his excitement, Academician Pan, who is usually gentle and elegant, couldn't help but burst out a swear word. In fact, this situation is very normal. Most science students are rough men. Most of them hide a rough heart under their elegant and easygoing appearance. For example, another professor Lu Chaoyuan likes to play Yasuo Hasake whenever he has nothing to do. Can you believe it? Let's get back to the point. About a few months ago, the rabbits did an experiment on the space bag, chapter 167. At that time, Special Soldier Liu Ming was riding in a small car. While driving at high speed, he untied the space bag and put down a ping-pong ball. The physics team observed the initial velocity of the ping-pong ball. Under normal circumstances, the ping-pong ball must have an initial velocity when it leaves the space bag, which is the kinetic energy converted from gravitational potential energy. No matter how small it is, it must exist. But in fact, what the rabbits saw was that the kinetic energy that the ping-pong ball should have originally in the space bag suddenly disappeared before the exit. As a result, it was in a static state with the ground as the reference system at the moment of contact with the outside. According to the law of conservation of energy, this kinetic energy cannot disappear. In other words, there must be some force that offsets it. But after deducing the step, the rabbits were stuck on the next question: where does this force come from? This question has troubled the rabbits for a long time, but there is still no answer. During this period, Zheng Guchen's team even broke more than one storage capsule after the capture of Yangbai City. The rabbits got several space bags, so they also had the confidence to carry out destructive research. However, it was disappointing. The rabbits broke open 4 storage capsules in a smallest space bag, but they didn't find out how this work-doing force came about. During this period, Zheng Guchen and his team also understood and studied the materials of the space bag. They tried to analyze the possibility that this material could release this kind of force. According to the information provided by Wei Qiangsheng and Tai Tower far away in Zhejiang City, all the space bags in the Great Mo realm were wholesale from Yaok, which was a kind of specialty. There was only one in the Great Mo realm, no other semicolon. Except Yaok, all other forces and cities could not produce space bags. Even the huge city in the east region of the Great Mo realm with a population of tens of millions and many Yuanying sitting in it was the same. The material used for the space bag was the skin of a kind of monster called the sky-devouring monster. The lowest realm of this kind of monster was the middle stage of the 3rd level. The number of sky-devouring monsters hunted each year was limited, and the number of remains was not large. But because of the huge size of this monster, a lot of materials can be produced. However, although this skin is precious and the material is special, it is actually just precious. It is at most a good carrier, with a tough texture, but it cannot absorb energy from the void. In addition to the monster skin, the rabbits also found a special microarray in each storage bag. This array is engraved inside the monster skin, and its function and engraving method are unknown. Hu Jun and his talisman-making team have tried to restore this array. But even if it is re-engraved according to the original trajectory, the newly made array still has no effect. It can't even transmit spiritual energy. Therefore, although the rabbits have some doubts about the role of the array, such as the unknown power is generated by the array, etc., they have remained in pure speculation because they can't actually verify it. Because of this, for a long time after that, the research on space bags basically stagnated. But with the latest idea of Academician Pan, It seems that there are some possibilities in the research on space bags. It has been mentioned before. Although Li Baoyan has not been to the Great Mo realm, this is related to many external factors. His own ability and level are beyond doubt. Therefore, before this, he had already read all the related achievements of the rabbits in the Damo world and had a general idea in his mind. In addition, there were only so many research results on the space bag, so he didn't spend much effort to follow Academician Pan's thinking. Ziopan, now that you put it like that, it seems to be true. Although the material of the Cheyenne going space is different from that of the space bag, the situation inside both sides does seem to be a little subtle. According to the report written by Academician Zhenguchen that I saw before, the space bag is the conservation of momentum of the center of mass system, and there is an external force from nowhere that cancels the kinetic energy converted from the internal potential energy. The Cheyenne going space is also the conservation of momentum of the center of mass system, but there is an additional work whose orientation is unknown. Combining the two, both ends seem to make sense. Academician Pan nodded heavily and said, our previous research on the space bag was a destructive experiment, and it was impossible to study the internal situation in a complete state. Therefore, we have no way of understanding many details. And if the Cheyenne going space is really a special space bag, then the architectural style of the main hall inside makes sense. It could have been put in by Zhang Daoling when he was in Huziao, and finally moved to Qingchang Mountain. But this still has some problems. For example, how was such a large space bag formed? Why is its boundary different from that of the Great Mo realm? Why is there an entrance like a cyclone? But if it is really a space bag, then many of our previously stagnant links will get a critical restart period. Academician Pan's attitude was very objective. He did not get too excited and claimed that he could completely crack the secret of the space bag. Scientific research is like writing a novel. After all, only a few people can become a god with one book. You must have a long-term vision. Even if you only have a few recommendations and increase your collection by 20 or 30 times a day, it is better than running naked without any recommendations. The same is true for scientific research. It is unrealistic to expect to solve all the problems at once. The road must be taken step by step. It is much better to have a new and feasible research direction than to be stuck in the mud for a long time. Then Academician Pan and Li Baoyan signed together and sent this speculation back to the base camp and handed it to Qin Hendong. I have to say, this news is really explosive. Even Qin Hendong, a frontier official, was moved when he heard the news. Mr. Li, Academician Pan, tell me the truth. How sure are you about this guess? Academician Pan looked at Li Baoyan, thought about it carefully, and replied, it is completely theoretically plausible. It's like two magnetic poles, complementing each other perfectly. Conservatively estimated, at least 50%. In fact, it is very simple to prove this guess. Just compare the formation we got from cracking the space bag. If the pattern of that formation is similar to the formation in front of the station, then it can be basically determined that the Cheyenne going space is a space bag, or at least the space bag is one of the characteristics of the Cheyenne Gong. Our supercomputing capacity is still very strong in identifying images, and basically there will be no accidents. As one of the main researchers in the Xinhao camp, Academician Pan has no restrictions on the access rights to the documents of the space bag project. He knows very well. Although the space bags that the rabbits dismantled before did not produce any results, the formations recorded in them were all preserved. At this moment, it is in Zhenguchen's laboratory, under the care of Zhenguchen's disciple Zhou Yuanxing. Although these arrays look slightly different to the naked eye, it is almost difficult to distinguish the similarities. But under the identification of scientific and technological instruments, their similarities are simply nowhere to hide and are clearly revealed. This is also one of the characteristics of cutting-edge AI. Its algorithm and the naked eye are two completely different concepts. Even if they are two pictures that look completely different, as long as there is an internal connection between the two sides, it can easily help you identify them. Academician Pan's request was quickly approved. An hour later, a device carrying detailed array images was sent back from the Damo realm. At the same time, another set of main hall array data scanned by the detector was also imported into the relevant network. Because this identification is of great importance, the rabbits deliberately used part of the computing power of Cheyenne Hufei and Tianjin. Half an hour later, a result was released. The orbital similarity between the array in front of the ruins of the main hall of the Shanghai and the array mark of the space bag in the Damo realm is 94.764344983445%. Note, the third update is here. Today is exactly 10,000 words. Please give me a monthly ticket. By the way, what does Jujuzi mean? I feel like people nowadays don't understand what they are saying. Chapter 319, the final test. I didn't expect it. The Heavenly Palace space is actually a space bag on the ground. Looking at the news sent back from the Magic City, Lin Ziming's expression was a little subtle. To be honest, the original underground palace in the sky was enough to destroy people's three views, and almost twisted a group of people's waists. As a result, it is only now known that the previous discoveries were just appetizers, and the real main course is behind. As the exclusive courier of the base camp, Lin Ziming personally participated in the whole process of the local space bag, so he knows very well. The space bag of the Great Mo realm is extremely difficult to open on the local side, and the consumption of spiritual power is more than 10 times. The specific reason involves the problem of the overlap of the space of the two worlds, which belongs to the cosmic rules that the rabbits have no ability to change. It is also a typical creator problem. As a result, who would have thought that now in Qingchang Mountain, the rabbits actually found such a large space bag? Although it is basically impossible to master the space bag at the moment, it is at least a direction. Then Lin Ziming looked at Academician Pan Jianwei, who had landed not long ago, and asked, "Academician Pan, what are you going to do next? Is there anything that needs organizational cooperation?" Academician Pan thought for a while and said, "Colonel Lin, although we have confirmed that the Shanghai space has the characteristics of a space bag, there are still many mysteries that have not been solved. Just now, while waiting for the supercomputer identification results, I had a few words with Mr. Li. Finally, I decided to wait until 5:55 tomorrow morning to see if there will be any new discoveries at that time, just as Academician Pan said. There are still a lot of mysteries in the space that have not been solved. For example, the boundary of space. Why does it produce gamma rays? If there is really a high-speed electron flow on the other side, then where does this high-speed electron flow come from? Although the photon entanglement experiment recorded an energy spectrum, which is a kind of code. But with the current level of science and technology, it may take a very long time to analyze the energy spectrum. The most conservative estimate is several months, or even years. In addition, the source of light source, spiritual energy source, and the origin of Y particles are still unknown. Among them, the light source belongs to the detection problem. A space of more than 10 square kilometers is not small, and there are still a lot of building ruins in the entire space. In addition, the rabbits can only send detectors with specifications within 30x30, so the entire search work still needs some time. The remaining two types of substances, aura and Y particles, are relatively special. The source of aura is still unknown, and the appearance of Y particles is suspected to be related to the Bremsstrahlung at the edge of space. As mentioned in the previous article, Academician Pan judged that the Shanghai space absorbs a large amount of nitrogen every morning. After these nitrogens enter the space, Bremsstrahlung occurs near the boundary. During the period, while releasing positrons, a large amount of heat is also released. The heat dissipation provides a sufficient living environment for the microorganisms in the space. The remaining part of the nitrogen reacts with the microorganisms to generate a large number of Y particles. These Y particles escape from the gap in the space, and finally form the unique cold environment of Qingchang Mountain. Since the above activities require a large amount of nitrogen, this set of statements is completely tenable in theory. But to make a final conclusion, specific experimental observations are needed. In this way, a time node is very critical, around 5:55 in the morning, 5:55 in the morning. According to the 12 hours, it belongs to the Mao hour, and there is nothing special about it. If it is 4 hours, 39 minutes, and 6 seconds in the morning, you can pull Kijiang over to try your luck, but you can't even think of a dirty word for the number 555. So the rabbits can only wait. The next morning, all departments are in place on time. Since this experiment does not require cyclones to emit particles such as photons, Academician Pan and Li Baoyan also stayed on the ground. After all, they are not young anymore, and taking a helicopter to do research is still a big burden on the body. In addition to the relay equipment, there are several drones used to detect the flow of spiritual energy in the high altitude. These drones all use a certain spiritual energy sensing technology developed by Wen Kaiyang's team, which can relatively roughly sense the changes and fluctuations of spiritual energy. Of course, a large amount of nitrogen is still released. If nothing unexpected happens, this should be the last detection experiment that may be carried out in the near future. 5:45 in the morning. All equipment has been debugged and started running in advance. 9 minutes later, it was 5:54 in the morning. On the ground. Beep beep. Suddenly, a nitrogen detection device issued a sharp prompt sound. Li Baoyan's face straightened when he saw it. The reaction has started. Xiao Zhao, connect to the internal image of Xiangong. Understood. After receiving the order, Zhao's hymen quickly crackled on the computer. After a while, an image that was somewhat similar to an electrocardiogram appeared on the screen. This is a fluid observation map. The accuracy is not high, 0.37 nanometers. This level is our quasi-second-line technical reserve. By the way, the best level mastered by Hassan is 0.43 nanometers. Before today's experiment began, Rabbit deliberately placed a large number of diffusion gas sensors inside Xiangong, and they were also ice-fit capacitor-type devices. The flow of nitrogen is actually the flow of particles, which belongs to a kind of microscopic normal momentum. After locking the target to the boundary of Xiangong, it is still very easy to achieve fixed-point monitoring of the flow trajectory. The specific encoding technology has been mentioned in the previous article, so I will not repeat it here. Because the gas flow takes a certain amount of time. Therefore, while paying attention to the flow of nitrogen, Academician Pan introduced the information on the image to Lin Ziming. Colonel Lin, look at the screen. These lines represent various elements. This very strong red represents nitrogen. At present, a large amount of nitrogen is moving towards the edge of space, and the vanguard has not been missing during the flow. This shows that the edge of space is likely to be the place where Bremsstrahlung occurs, as we guessed. If nothing unexpected happens, we will be able to detect thermal energy and Yi particles from here later. And find clusters of microorganisms. Lin Ziming nodded thoughtfully, and then thought of something and asked, Academician Pan, in addition to Y particles, where do you think the spiritual energy in space comes from? Academician Pan touched his chin and said carefully, at present, we have not grasped the direction of the spiritual energy, but I personally have an idea. That is, will the spiritual energy come from that array? Note, there is a difference of more than 60 votes for the monthly ticket of 150. 150 will add 20,000 words. Don't miss it by tomorrow. I bought a box of agarwood and plan to try it to see if it has a sleeping effect. I have been taking melatonin for a long time, but it seems to be useless recently. As for sleeping pills, I have not considered them because they are too damaging to the brain. Chapter 320, Formation. On the ground. Hearing what Academician Pan said, Lin Ziming immediately raised his eyebrows. Formation. Academician Pan nodded and said, yes, I personally think that this possibility is relatively large. Because the space of the Heavenly Palace is not small, but it is actually not that big. In addition to the outer wall of the space, the main hall, the formation, the unknown light source and the entrance are obviously abnormal. In addition, I am currently studying the teleportation array, and I am more sensitive to runes. Although the mystery of teleportation has not been completely cracked yet, several runes have been decrypted. The rune we use for the classic channel is one of them. I have carefully studied the formation in front of the main hall, especially the runes in it. Although most of the runes are unclear, several of them are similar to the teleportation array. If nothing unexpected happens, those are likely to be runes that transmit information. So I personally guess that the formation should be where the spiritual energy appears. Lin Ziming nodded as if he understood, and was about to say a few polite words. However, at this moment, Li Baoyan on the side suddenly spoke. He suddenly supported the main console with both hands, leaned forward, and stared at the screen. Colonel Lin, Xiao Pan, look at the screen, the nitrogen is reacting. Lin Ziming heard this and immediately cast his eyes on the screen. Then he found that he couldn't understand anything. He saw a bunch of red, white and green images stirring on the screen, and he, an outsider, had no idea what was going on. In the last second, it was squeezed like dough, and in the next second, a thick black line suddenly appeared, and it stabbed directly into the pink area. Then a stream of white images emerged, floating like white pulp. Then a group of rough men on the side looked excited, their faces flushed, and they also roared excitedly, "It's out! It's out. Lin Ziming looked around secretly and found that only Wang Dao Cheng and Wei Fan were as confused as himself. And it was a coincidence. While Lin Ziming was glancing at the other two, Dao Zhang Wang and the other two were also looking at him. So the next second, the three of them moved a few steps closer in tacit understanding, shivering and huddling together for warmth. JPG. About 3 minutes passed like this. A low cry suddenly broke out near the operating table. Lin Ziming hurriedly came forward and found Academician Pan. Academician Pan, is there any result? Academician Pan's expression was not broken at this time, and he nodded calmly. Yes, the result is out. Just now, we detected a large amount of nitrogen consumption and the generation of N13 isotopes. In addition, although neutrinos cannot be captured due to problems with existing technical means, we have found positrons accompanying the generation of neutrinos. In other words, Bremsstrahlung does occur at the border of Shanghai, and our guess is already more than half correct. The rest is to observe the direction of energy and determine the specific location of the microbial community. As soon as Academician Pan finished speaking, Zhao Haiming, who was operating the equipment on the side, said loudly, Mr. Li, Academician Pan, heat energy is beginning to dissipate. It was mentioned before. Bremsstrahlung radiation generates a large amount of heat energy, and this energy level is even greater than many common gunpowder explosions. Therefore, it is very simple for observers to track this heat energy. At this moment, on the computer screen of the main control, a red and yellow image suddenly appeared, giving people a burning sensation even through the screen. It was like Jinlong IU5A edible blended oil falling along the glass window, slowly sliding down 15%, 30%, 50%. This image gradually covered most of the screen area, and finally settled in a certain position and remained motionless. This process is very simple and clear. Even non-industry insiders like Lin Ziming can understand what happened. The energy moves along a certain trajectory and finally stops in a certain area. And this area is obviously where the microorganisms exist. Then he coughed lightly and asked Academician Pan, Academician Pan, what area of the Shanghai is this location? Hearing this, Academician Pan was rarely silent for a while, and then two words popped out of his mouth, underground. Lin Ziming, seeing this, Academician Pan couldn't help but sighed. You heard it right, it is under the ground of the Shanghai. Colonel Lin, this is the nth time that the Shanghai has made an unexpected discovery for us. But to be honest, we should have thought of this situation earlier. In the final analysis, our thinking is too rigid. After saying this, Academician Pan rubbed his temples in annoyance, and it can be seen that he was a little depressed. Just as Academician Pan said, the area where the energy finally disappeared in state was the underground of the Shanghai. Although the Shanghai is located in the sky, it is itself an alien space. To be able to carry the main hall and other buildings, there must be land. It is not known whether this land comes with this space or Comrade Lao Zhang got it by means, but the fact is that this space has a lot of mud ground. This situation is not difficult to understand. Even in the Paradise in the novels, there is land inside, which is a standard environment. What Academician Pan said, should have thought of it earlier, is even simpler. Among the equipment that Wei Fan put in at the beginning, the research team had several devices dedicated to sampling soil. In other words, the rabbits did not ignore the problem of land. In addition, there is an analysis of this matter that is a bit hindsight, that is, the microorganisms that produce Y particles need a high-temperature environment similar to the Earth vane flame to survive, and the temperature of the entire space is dozens of degrees below zero, so their greatest possibility is of course underground. No one actually noticed that I didn't talk about the ground. I was disappointed that such an obvious foreshadowing was not discovered. At least there must be thousands of them, unfortunately, because the area collected by the sampler did not find any signs of condensed microorganisms. Therefore, including Academician Pan and others, everyone subconsciously ignored the ground environment. Of course, this is also related to the continuous new discoveries of the rabbits. After all, a person's thinking ability is limited. When their computing power is occupied by the boundary of the Shanghai, which may involve the outer universe or even the higher dimension, they will naturally have less judgment on other environments. But no matter what, this is indeed a mistake that needs to be reviewed. But now that the location where the energy disappears has been determined, everything becomes simple. Academician Pan and his team waited for a few more minutes. Soon, the beam guide issued a prompt. Wang Qiang originally relied on this device to determine the existence of Y particles. This technology is still very mature. About a minute later, Zhao Haiming reported a result that everyone expected. Mr. Li, academician Pan, a large number of Y particles are generated where the energy disappears. In other words, it can be determined that there are clusters of condensed microorganisms underground. Academician Pan Jianwei heard this and breathed a sigh of relief. Although the possible anomalies on the ground were ignored at the beginning, it is not too late to remedy it now. More importantly, his guess about the regional boundary and Y particles is correct. However, he didn't relax for long. The next second, then he heard Zhao Haiming's voice suddenly rise, even trembling. Report, there is a new situation. Li Baoyan saw this, and couldn't help but frown slightly and asked, Zhao, what happened? He knew his assistant well, and knew that he was a person who didn't like to shout. Not to mention that he didn't change his face when the sky collapsed. At least his mood was very good. At least in Li Baoyan's memory, Zhao Haiming had never lost his composure like this. He was beside him, and Zhao Haiming swallowed hard. Mr. Li, another device in the formation detected spiritual energy. Academician Pan Jianwei's eyes lit up when he saw this. Spiritual energy? Did it appear from the formation? Zhao Haiming shook his head and smiled bitterly at him. No, the area where the spiritual energy appeared is unclear, but they disappeared in the formation. Note, a reader asked how long it might take to write this book. After thinking about it, I really haven't talked about this matter, so I'll say it. It is expected to be between 2.6 and 3 million. The Xiangong plot has come to an end. Although the popularity of this plot has reached a new high, there is no point in dragging it out. Everyone seems to like watching the local plot 0.0. Chapter 321, Temporary End. On the ground. Hearing Zhao Haiming's words, Academician Pan was stunned for a moment, and asked in surprise, Zhao, what did you say? Are you sure that the spiritual energy disappeared through the formation? Zhao Haiming nodded to him with certainty, pointed to the screen and said, Academician Pan, this is what the device shows. This time we detect spiritual energy using the spiritual energy microsensing technology developed by researcher Wen Kaiyang's team. The accuracy of tracking spiritual energy in a fixed area is very high. According to the detection of these devices, almost at the same time as the Y particles appeared, an unknown spiritual energy suddenly appeared in the space, and most of it was transmitted away through the formation. The remaining part of the spiritual energy and the Y particles remained in the space, drifting around irregularly. If nothing unexpected happens, this part of the spiritual energy is the part we detected here on the cliff. They overflowed and settled here through the entrance of the cyclone. Looking at the picture displayed on the screen, Academician Pan opened his mouth, but finally did not speak. To be honest, although the discovery this time was different from what he expected, it was far from a failure. After all, scientific research requires bold assumptions. If such a judgment is attributed to failure, no one would dare to make a guess. Therefore, Academician Pan's expression was not filled with social shame, but with a little joy and a lot of doubts. The joy was because the disappearance of the aura proved that his judgment on the characteristics of some runes was correct. They were indeed teleportation runes. It's just that the function of the entire formation is not to transmit matter from the outside as he thought, but to transport aura out. In other words, from the perspective of the properties of runes alone, there is no problem with the results and direction of the space research team. It's relatively good news. Scientific research is like solving problems in an exam. If someone tells you that all the multiple choice questions are correct, when you have finished half of the test paper, your confidence will be improved to some extent. As for the doubts, they are very simple. That is, where does the aura come from? Where do they transmit to? Let's not talk about the latter for now. The former should be certain in theory. The main reason why Zhao Haiming said unknown source is because there are not enough monitoring equipment at present. Thinking of this, Academician Pan said to Zhao Haiming, Zhao, is there any way to trace the source of spiritual energy? Zhao Haiming hesitated for a few seconds and pointed at Wang Kaiyang and said, you may have to ask researcher Wang. After all, this equipment is the technical support developed by their team. Academician Pan turned around and cast an inquiring look at Wang Kaiyang. Wang Kaiyang saw this and shook her head gently. Academician Pan, you should know. At present, our induction of spiritual energy mainly relies on practitioners, let alone tracing the source. Our set of spiritual energy microsensing equipment has just been developed not long ago, and it is mainly aimed at the spiritual energy induction of fixed areas. The difficulty of tracing the source is too great. And now our detection personnel can't enter the space and can't conduct manpower exploration. So before this set of equipment reaches a certain number, we probably can't determine the source of the spiritual energy. Of course, we can also blindly guess some areas like smashing golden eggs, such as asking teacher Ming Mao or director Fei Chu to try, but the possibility of this is almost zero. Academician Pan propped up his chin with his hand and asked again, Xiao Wang, what is the output of this spiritual energy microsensing equipment? Wang Qiang thought for a while and said, the spiritual energy microsensing equipment needs to use a special rune as the sensing core. At present, the talisman team of Academician Hu Junhu has not found a way to mass-produce runes. So it will take at least 5 months to prepare equipment that can fully monitor the spiritual energy in the Xiangong area. Academician Pan's expression remained unchanged, but the fingers pinching his chin could not help but become heavier. 5 months, at this moment. Lin Ziming, who had been silent all the time, suddenly said, Academician Pan, I have always wanted to ask a question. If the equipment is limited, is there any way for us to increase the entrance area, or send petite detectors to collect information? Even if they are not practitioners, the information that can be collected by manpower is much higher than that of machines, right? The specifications of the cyclone entrance are 30 x 30 centimeters. Under normal circumstances, ordinary people definitely cannot enter. But China has a large population base. If you really want to find someone, you can still find a few qualified candidates. The number may not be large, but it will never be zero. It doesn't matter even if the other party is not in the system. At most, you can give him a few million in remuneration, and then arrange for him to stay in the Great Mo realm for a few years after the job is done. In this case, let alone millions or tens of millions of remuneration, if there is really a suitable candidate, what's the harm in giving him 100 million? When it comes to issues involving local spiritual energy, money is really just a number. However, to Lin Ziming's surprise, Academician Pan shook his head. Colonel Lin, you think too simply. The entrance is definitely not expandable, and the size of the internal imprint is the limit of our means. As for sending people, first of all, the temperature in the space is about minus 60 degrees Celsius, and this temperature alone requires heavy protective clothing. Even if people can be transported in by separating clothes, it is difficult for non-professionals to start working immediately. Not to mention that there are still a large number of gamma rays near the edge of space, plus a large number of positrons. Today's Xiangong space is like a secret room full of methane, and big problems may occur if you are not careful. After saying this, Academician Pan looked at the sky, then looked at Wang Qiang, and continued, if our preparation period takes 3, 5 or even 10 years, I may support sending people in to explore the space. Because we really can't wait that long, time is running out. But if it only takes 5 months, then I think this risk is not worth taking. Academician Pan said this very solemnly, and it can be seen that he really thinks so in his heart. It has to be said. What Academician Pan said actually makes a lot of sense. As mentioned before, positrons are a type of antimatter. Under normal circumstances, antimatter is likely to produce annihilation reactions when it encounters ordinary positive matter. For example, positrons and electrons. Note, the reaction here is not explosion or destruction, but annihilation. The energy generated by the annihilation of 0.5 grams of antimatter is almost equivalent to the energy generated by the atomic bomb explosion in Hiroshima. Of course, this reaction is actually the principle of producing gamma rays, so most positrons in space will not react with other substances. But as the saying goes, it's better to be safe than sorry. Mechanical equipment is okay after a certain degree of protection, but it is difficult for the human body to be protected by antimatter. Considering that some of the students who are not familiar with this subject failed seriously, I will not go into details here. Then Academician Pan thought of something and said to Zhao Haiming, Xiao Zhao, have you found the light source in the space? Where does the light come from? Zhao Haiming pulled out an apologetic smile and shook his head helplessly. Academician Pan, I'm sorry. We analyzed the spectral energy levels of each area in the space and found that the light intensity at any position in the entire space is consistent. In addition, the movement trajectory of each photon is very free. So we really don't have the ability to find the source of the light at present. The so-called freedom is naturally Zhao Haiming's high emotional intelligence rhetoric. In layman's terms, the trajectory of photons in the entire space is a mess. In this case, it is indeed not easy to determine the source of the light. At this point, everything that should be determined has been decided. Then Lin Ziming looked at Academician Pan, and Academician Pan nodded slightly to him knowingly. Seeing this, Lin Ziming took a deep breath and said, "In that case, Academician Pan, Academician Li, Zio Wang, please write me a report on your achievements and the problems you solved, and we will fight again in 5 months. Note, today is the last day of the 5th extra update event. If you rank 150, you will get an extra 20,000 words. Now I am 158th, and I am only 17 votes away from 150th. Why not give it a try? Cheng Xiang will arrive tomorrow, and I hope I can improve my sleep quality and then start updating." Chapter 322, Disclosure Plan of Damoji Technology. The report signed by Lin Ziming, Academician Pan and others was quickly passed to the core layer, and received the final approval from the core layer, passed. At this point, the rabbit's first exploration of the Xiangong space has come to a temporary end. There are still many unknown problems waiting to be solved, but there are also many valuable discoveries. First of all, a very important point is that there is indeed an unknown period of cultivation in the local area. The age of this period is unknown, and the reason for its decline is also unknown, but it may be extremely brilliant and dazzling. And if nothing unexpected happens, that period of cultivation is at least thousands of years ago. As for why there is not much physical evidence left, this requires further inspection and in-depth excavation. Secondly, there is currently some evidence that seems to point to the part of the Qinling Mountains in Huzhou province, which is the dragon tail of the dragon vein. To be honest, this judgment is not very accurate, and it is a guess after the accumulation of some unexpected discoveries. But in any case, this is considered to have a specific goal, at least much better than blind search. The third is the results of scientific research. These include the ion channel instrument newly developed by Academician Pan and the psychic microsensing equipment of Wen Kaiyang's team. Among them, the psychic microsensing equipment can sense the existence of spiritual energy at a fixed point, making up for the defect of the equipment accuracy column. It is not necessary to take samples first and then send them back to the agency for testing as before. This also allows the rabbits to break away from their dependence on the Wei family practitioners under certain conditions. This is especially important under local conditions. After all, you can't let Wei Fan climb over a mountain like a drug-sniffing dog, right? This is too unrealistic. At the same time, the local area is not the Heavenly Palace space, and there are no restrictions on the entrance area. Placing a few psychic microsensing devices in some key areas may play a decisive role in the local spiritual energy search. As for Academician Pan's ion channel instrument, its theoretical value is higher. Using metal ions to build a classical channel, once this result is fully announced, it will at least be a Nobel Prize, plus contracting the quantum section of Nature magazine for the next 2 years. In front of this thing, any radio silent signal shielding is useless, because it is equivalent to pulling a telephone line through the air and plugging it directly into your ear. In addition, a very special thing about this project is that it can be announced to the public. That's right. It can be announced to the public. It has been mentioned before. The runes of the Damo realm are actually a special kind of code, but the encryption method is different. Some of them require spiritual energy to guide activation, while others can be replaced by other algorithms. The core rune of the ion channel instrument is one of them. Academician Pan's team encrypted a note key 46 times, and the factorization value of the product of large prime numbers can completely replace the effect of this rune. However, since encryption is very complicated and costly, Academician Pan still used the rune core this time. Another reason why this technology is suitable for publication is that it is one of the 4 possibilities that Mr. Yang once proposed. Of course, if it is said to be disclosed to the public, only the initial stage of the results will be disclosed at that time. It's like you make 100,000 yuan and others say you make a few thousand yuan, the bulk of the money is covered. It's almost a kind of news that XX team has a major breakthrough in XX information, and mature technology will not be disclosed to the public. This kind of news can firstly enhance national self-confidence and pride, and secondly, it can elevate the national status in a specific field. Thirdly, it is phishing, and those who understand will understand. The initial results of this technology are the kind of breakthroughs that existing technology may take 5 or 6 years to achieve. It won't be so exaggerated as to destroy people's worldview, but it will surprise those who are interested for a long time. This is actually one of the long-term standard plans of the rabbits or various countries. If readers often pay attention to this aspect, they will find that it seems that every country regularly announces a few new technologies every year. And every time, one country will come out and the other will come out. Take 2017 as an example. On February 6, 2017, we synthesized a stable helium compound Na2He for the first time. And 3 days later, the Eagle Sauce announced the news that it can mass-produce natural cooling metamaterials. On July 21st of the same year, it was the opposite side again. The quantum anomalous Hall insulator superconductor structure discovered the chiral major fermion mode. More than 10 days later, John Bull announced the technology that can prepare 50 trillionths of a degree above absolute zero. On November 30th, our dark matter particle detection satellite Wukong announced the discovery of evidence that dark matter may exist. 2 weeks later, NASA and Google jointly announced the discovery of a second solar system. Basically, you discover something, and after a while it happened to break through the barriers in a similar field. At first glance, these technologies seem to be able to change the world, but in fact, they are just breaking through XX barriers. And in a few years, you will find that these technologies are actually silent. To be honest, compared with those technologies, the initial results of the ion channel instrument are just so-so. Anyway, only a little information will be written in the paper, and the key intelligence will be kept by themselves. This is just like those welfare girls. Usually, they only post some marginal balls. If you want to set pictures, you can pay for it yourself. More importantly, Academician Pan's laboratory is in Yanjing, which is helpful for dispersing the exposure risks of Moto and Jumang base. Therefore, after this proposal was put forward, it quickly passed a core layer's argumentation. If nothing unexpected happens, within 2 or 3 months, this technology will be initially disclosed to the public. This is also a risk-free foreshadowing, which can be regarded as the rabbit's bad taste. When everything can be made public in the future, the public will find out that, oh, it turns out that we were exposed to the news of the Great Mo realm at that time. The rabbits are awesome. Ahem. The site returns to the discovery of the Xiangong space. In addition to the ion channel instrument and Wang Kaiang's psychic microsensing equipment, the biggest gain of the rabbits this time is undoubtedly the observation report of the space boundary. It has been mentioned before. There is a high-speed electron flow bombarding the other side of the space boundary regularly, and positrons are produced after Bremsstrahlung. These positrons annihilate to generate energy, and finally provide enough heat energy for the condensed microorganisms. And the high-speed electron flow thing actually appears in the universe. In addition to the interval cycle of 24 hours, even if the rabbits cannot determine where the outside world at the edge of the space is, they can roughly analyze some situations. In addition to the extremely important map detected by photons, it can be said that the rabbits have made a lot of money this time. Perhaps the information that can be obtained from it is still limited in the end. But don't forget. Not to mention the rabbits, all countries have zero knowledge of space. Therefore, even if it is just a little bit of information, it may bring inestimable progress to the rabbits. As for the remaining unknown issues in space, they have been mentioned in the previous article, so I will not repeat them here. After being approved by the core layer, this review report was circulated to Qin's Hendong in the Magic City and sealed for storage. At the same time, several factories with terrifyingly high levels of equipment also started operations one after another, racing against time to produce microsensing equipment. The first local Xiangong space research has officially come to an end, and all departments are preparing for the second research 5 months later. And just a few days after the Xiangong research ended, some changes also occurred in the Damo world. There were some problems in the background, and some readers saw the garbled code space. I saw the notification from the author group after I posted it. It has been corrected now, and there should be no problem. Chapter 323. Suspected new human in the Great Mo world. At the same time when the local side finished the exploration of the Heavenly Palace. In the Xinhao camp of the Damo realm. Lin Li was sitting in the office chair of the headquarters, listening to the relevant report of his other direct disciple Li Yan. Li Yan is 17 years and 144 months old this year, and is also a single dog. But unlike Wang Kaiang, a genius who graduated from the junior class of the University of Science and Technology of China, Li Yan is a standard hard-working player. She is not a top student. Whether it is the college entrance examination or the postgraduate entrance examination, she basically passed the exam with a high score. Under the beautiful appearance, there are countless nights of hard study and hair falling. During the time when Wang Qiang went to the local support, this short-haired girl became the temporary leader of the plant growth team and led the research tasks of the entire team. At this moment, she sat upright, took out a stack of reports from the file bag beside her, and handed them to Lin Li. Teacher, the above is the research report on the footprints in the deep pit of Kyangu Mountain, and the following is the test results of the black spirit stone found by Colonel Lin and his team. Lin Li took the form, dipped his index finger in tea, and rubbed it on the footer of the report. The report was naturally divided into several pages, which was very easy to read. Of course, when no one was around, tea would mostly be replaced by another liquid. Then Lin Li carefully read the report. Before the local Shanghai appeared, the reconnaissance team led by Zhang Yaking, the company commander of the reconnaissance company, had discovered a cave in Kyangu Mountain. The height of the cave was suspected to be left by Mo Pidong, and there was an altar in a deep pit inside. The depth of this deep pit would not be less than 100,000 meters, which was unfathomable. At that time, Lei Wenjin found creep rock, which only exists on the moon, a huge footprint and a blue turtle in it. In addition, Lin Ziming also found several black spirit stones near the altar, and his mind was affected to a certain extent. In the past 10 days, while the local side was cracking the Shanghai, the Xinhuo camp did not stop its research on Kyangu Mountain. The depth of the deep pit has not yet been measured. After all, the configuration and debugging of special equipment are not a problem that can be solved in 10 days. The camp focused on several objects, hoping to get some information. Seeing Lin Li flipping through the report, Li Yan took the initiative to speak. Teacher, that footprint is a trace left by a barefoot, which is what we call barefoot. According to our detection, the creature that left the footprint would not be less than 5.4 meters tall and would not weigh less than 8 tons. And Lin Li glanced at her, and what? And it is likely to be some new type of human, not other primates. Lin Li raised his head in some confusion, staring at his apprentice, and asked, why do you think so? Doesn't it have 7 toes? Li Yan organized her words and explained, Teacher, when we detected the footprints, we first eliminated the interference factor of ground conditions, and then restored the structural form of the moving body by comparing the force series of different parts. Later, based on the functional relationship between the face and the foot area, we restored a biological body shape. The picture is on the second page. You can take a look. Hearing this, Lin Li quickly turned to the next page of the report. On this page of the report, a face similar to that of a human was drawn. This is a middle-aged man about 30 years old, with a sallow complexion, large ears, and slightly buck teeth. Then Li Yan continued, what we sampled is a barefoot imprint, without any external objects such as soles to block it, so we can clearly collect and analyze the force conditions in each area. Finally, it was determined that this creature has 7 tarsal bones, 5 metatarsal bones, and 14 toe bones, a total of 26 foot bones. And according to the corresponding a similar relationship, the body conditions of the creature were restored, and there was almost no difference from the humans in the Great Mo world. As for the appearance picture, it is very simple. We analyzed the navicular bone imprint of its right foot and found that the teeth of this creature suspected of being a new human are extremely developed. And the navicular tuberosity on the inner side is extremely prominent, which means that his front teeth are very large. The sole of the human foot is a very mysterious area. People are more exposed to the concept of the sole reflex zone. For example, a certain actor famously attacked my kidney reflex zone. When you walk down the street, you can often see all kinds of pedicure shops. Some are individual and some are chains. In fact, in addition to the concept of reflex zones, the soles of the feet are also a very typical application area for biometrics. How mature is this technology at present? Even if you look like Captain Jia, who only appears once in thousands of years, as long as you can get your barefoot print, the technicians can restore your facial features to no less than 87% without any image. However, it must be a very clear barefoot, and the footprints of shoes are much less useful. For example, the son of the famous blaster was exposed because his footprints were taken away, and he died in the end. Now barefoot biometrics has begun to move towards the sexual characteristics area, and it is hoped that some parts that LSP likes very much can be restored. Of course, this is used for serious things. The picture restored by Li Yan and others is not 87% accurate, but at least 60% is definitely there. Looking at the report in his hand, Lin Li couldn't help but fall into deep thought. A new human being that is different from the Great Mo world but has a similar body structure. The restoration of the footprint portrait has completed part of the task, but it also brings more mysteries. For example, what is the internal structure of this suspected new human creature? Don't think it's just an ordinary person magnified several times. To support the activities of this body, the internal organs and bones are definitely not as simple as size x2 x3. And no matter whether this creature has buck teeth or a bald head, how did he appear in the deep pit? Although Lei Wenjin and his team have not been able to detect the bottom of the deep pit, it is not difficult to explore hundreds or thousands of meters through equipment. But during the entire exploration process, Lei Wenjin's team did not find the second footprint. This is a very strange thing. It's as if the creature flew up. However, this kind of investigation requires the involvement of Lei Wenjin, and Li Yan and others are mainly responsible for providing scientific research support. Therefore, Lin Li had to suppress these questions in his heart and continued to ask, "Xiao Li, how is the blue turtle?" Hearing this, Li Yan shook her head gently. "Teacher, we have tested the turtle many times and there is no sign of life in the body. The internal organs photographed by X-rays are no different from those of ordinary dead turtles. It looks like a dead thing no matter how you look at it, but what?" Xiao Wang asked Teacher Mingmao to calculate it that day. Teacher Mingmao said with certainty that the turtle was dead. After they left, Xiao Wang started shouting some weird words like poison milk and definitely not dead, and strongly requested that we not dissect the turtle. Lin Li, he wanted to put on the dignity of a teacher and say something nonsense, but thinking of Teacher Mingmao's previous record, Lin Li found that he was inexplicably hesitant. Then he sighed and forced a change of subject. "Put this aside for now, Xiao Li, let's talk about the black spirit stone. The agarwood has arrived. It's a bit expensive, 80 per gram. But I heard it can burn for a long time. This is the only update today. I will go to bed at 8 p.m., and then I will start updating 3 times non-stop. Let's see how long it can last. It won't be less than 3 days. Chapter 324 Black Spirit Stone. When exploring Kyangu Mountain, in addition to the footprints in Blue Turtle in the deep pit, Lin Ziming also found several black spiritual stones near the altar. These spiritual stones are very different in color from the ordinary green spiritual stones, and look very strange. In addition, according to Lin Ziming, when he held the spiritual stones in his hands, he would have a strange impulse to refine the spiritual stones and jump into the deep pit. Although this impulse is not very strong, he can be sure that it does exist and comes from the black spiritual stone itself. Therefore, among the 3 items brought back from Kyangu Mountain, the headquarters attached the highest importance to the research on the black spiritual stone. In the command room, he heard Lin Li's question. Li Yan supported her penis and motioned Lin Li to turn the report to the next page. She said, "Teacher, according to our test, the black spirit stone is almost the same as the ordinary spirit stone in terms of stone composition. Their hardness and light transmittance are almost the same as ordinary spirit stones. That is to say." "Stop, wait a minute." Lin Li suddenly raised his hand to interrupt Li Yan, frowning and asked, "The light transmittance is about the same as ordinary spirit stones? How is this possible? No matter how good the light transmittance of black materials is, it can't be at the same level as green materials, light transmittance. This is a very basic, but actually very complicated concept. It is actually not the same knowledge point as the color of an object, just like a whale is not a fish. Students who have studied physics should know that an object will appear black because it absorbs all light. No light is reflected by the object and enters the human eye, so the information reflected by the human eye is naturally black. This is the concept of color. Of course, all the light here is a general term. After all, there is no absolute black body in nature because it violates the 3 laws of heat. But light transmittance is actually different from the concept of color, and it even involves the quantum field. It can even be said that the existing theory cannot fully and thoroughly explain light transmittance. At most, it uses the band structure to give a resonance explanation. Here is a very interesting thing. In the field of scientific research, the number of amateur scientists who study metal light transmittance is actually no less than those who study perpetual motion machines. For example, when a failed writer with a pen named Novus Fisherman was working part-time as a gatekeeper, he once saw an amateur scientist holding a piece of glass and saying that it was transparent metal. He asked for a 9-digit funding and applied it to the armor field. This is a real thing that happened. Sometimes amateur scientists are really outrageous. Okay, let's return to the original point. In short, Light transmittance involves the diffuse reflection of light between the grain boundaries inside the solid. So most of the time, the light transmittance of black objects is definitely not as good as that of other colors. For example, for a piece of paper of the same thickness, the light transmittance of black is mostly worse than that of other colors. Not to mention materials like lingxi that are made of stone. Therefore, Lin Lifan was a little surprised. Why is the light transmittance of black lingxi similar to that of ordinary lingxi? He didn't think that there was something wrong with Li Yan's research report. A project of this level couldn't have errors or omissions in such simple data. Sure enough, Li Yan quickly replied, "Teacher, under normal circumstances, the light transmittance of black is indeed not as good as that of green, but the problem is that the black component in the black spirit stone is not a solid substance, but a black gas. At the same time, according to our detection, this black gas is exactly spiritual energy." Hearing this, Lin Li immediately raised his eyebrows. What? Black spiritual energy, black spiritual energy. It must be said that this is indeed a somewhat surprising discovery. Who would have thought that the strangeness of the black spirit stone was not because of the abnormal appearance caused by the presence of some special substance, but because of the black spiritual energy stored inside? If it weren't for the psychological quality of being calm in the face of changes during this period, he might even stand up from his seat. Immediately, he thought of something and hurriedly lowered his head to check the report. Gas density. Activation properties. Monster absorption. He quickly compared the data on the report with the spiritual energy in his mind one by one, and finally found to his surprise that the black gas detected was indeed exactly the same as the spiritual energy. Even the Le Chatelier characteristic that the higher the concentration, the more spiritual particles it can absorb is exactly the same. In other words, if you close your eyes, the black spiritual stone is essentially no different from the ordinary spiritual stone. Then a flash of lightning flashed through Lin Li's mind, and he looked up and asked Li Yan, "Xiao Li, what about those monsters that absorbed the black spiritual energy? How are they?" Although the black spiritual stone is chemically the same as the spiritual energy, it obviously has some very strange and even dark characteristics. This thing is just like Wang Daquan next door. When you see him, your first reaction is that there is definitely something wrong with this guy. In this way, the monsters that absorb the black spiritual energy in the experiment are very valuable for reference. Hearing Lin Li's words, Li Yan's eyes suddenly showed a trace of horror, and she swallowed with some effort. Then she paused, and did not directly explain the situation. Instead, she asked Lin Li, "Captain Lin, have you seen Return of the Condor Heroes 3? Although Lin Li didn't understand, he still recalled, "The one with Wang Yi and Ma Yili? I've seen it several times," Li Yan continued to ask. "Then do you remember the scene where Arcane was captured because of his defeat and asked for silver bead powder when he became ill?" Lin Li blinked and said thoughtfully, "I see. Are you saying that those monsters showed symptoms similar to withdrawal reactions?" Li Yan nodded quickly and affirmatively, and said, "That's right. After inhaling the black spiritual energy, those monsters became manic and riotous in a very short period of time. As long as we input black spiritual energy again, they will become quiet. But as long as the black spiritual energy disappears, they will start to riot repeatedly. Later, we installed isotope labeling equipment. It was found that the number of phenylethylamine and methyltransferase in these monsters increased dramatically after inhaling the spiritual energy." As a biology expert, Lin Li reacted the moment he heard about phenylethylamine and methyltransferase. Phenylethylamine and methyltransferase. So it is the abnormality caused by the increase of adrenaline. Wang Qiang nodded and said, "Yes, this is one of the most obvious abnormalities. The adrenaline in those monsters has increased dramatically, and there are also some other clinical manic manifestations. Adrenaline is the main hormone in the adrenal medulla. It can strengthen the contractility of the myocardium, increase excitability, accelerate conduction, and increase cardiac output. When you watch a movie, this hormone will increase a lot. So you can often hear your heartbeat when you lie in bed. This hormone is one of the essential hormones for humans or other animals, but under normal circumstances, the brain will strictly control the production of this hormone. This is not difficult to understand. The heartbeat is like a drag race. The greater the horsepower, the higher the possibility of a car accident or the cylinder cannot withstand the pressure and explode. Hearing here, Lin Li had a rough idea of the fate of those experimental monsters. "So those monsters," Li Yan nodded and said, "Yes, those monsters finally died of high heart rate, and some of them even had their hearts exploded into pieces. In addition, there is another situation. What situation? The bones of those monsters all turned black, extremely black. Linley thought about it and blurted out a vulgar word. Fuck, Mo Pidong. Note, there will be 3 updates today. The second one will be around 11 o'clock, and the third one will be at dawn tomorrow. Cheng Xiang is simply a magic weapon. I didn't feel dizzy at all when I woke up after a night's sleep. Chapter 325 The Truth. In addition to the ice coffin, the rabbits also found a skeleton in the Mo family's secret room. The skeleton was in a meditative posture, with an object similar to golden elixir in its body. Later, the skeleton and the ice coffin were brought back to the base, and its identity was confirmed through technical means. Mo Xiaonan, the third ancestor of the Mo family, or Mo Pidong. As Mo Pidong's identity was confirmed, a series of mysteries were generated. For example, why did he die in the secret room? A practitioner of the 5th level of the Jianden realm, in theory, is in his 90s, which is the strongest age, and it is impossible for him to die suddenly at the end of his life. Let alone the 5th level of the Jianden realm. Don't you see how many long-distance runners in their 90s are still competing for the championship in the country and abroad? In addition, there are also mysteries such as where Mo Pidong found the ice coffin and the stone slab. Of course, there is also the whereabouts of the little transparent Wu Fan, who is remembered because of the stone slab. In addition to the many mysteries to be solved above, the most abnormal situation is another situation. The skeleton of the skeleton is pitch black, like charcoal. Under normal circumstances, human bones are white. Even if you are a non-African or a black-eyed person, you will still be a European after peeling off the black outer skin. The reason why most bones are white is because their main component is hydroxyapatite. That is, calcium hydroxyphosphate. For students who are not familiar with calcium hydroxyphosphate, you don't need to care about the 4 words in front of it, just look at the last word calcium. Substances containing a lot of calcium are basically white in color. It's not that there are no creatures with black skeletons in nature. For example, the black chicken has black bones. The reason for this situation is naturally not that the black chicken is not good, but because the bones and flesh of the black chicken contain true melanin and light melanin, the latter of which is also called isomelanin. As soon as Mo Pidong's skeleton was transported back, the rabbits analyzed its bone composition. Of course, from the perspective of protecting integrity, the rabbits tested the skull's chin. At that time, after seeing the rabbits break through the defense of the barrier belt, the chin suddenly fell to the ground for some reason. It happened to be recycled by the rabbits and collected for testing. The result of the study was that the skeleton did not contain any melanin or melanin-like components. Theoretically, this thing should be white. Since then, the color of Mo Pidong's skeleton has become one of the unsolved mysteries in the camp, along with the name of the old master Wei. Among them, Wang Jun's team, who measured the bone age, found that Mo Pidong had no other abnormal lesions except at before his death. There was even an idea that there was a special evolutionary case of congenital black bones in the Great Mo world. But with the discovery of Li Yan and others, this problem seems to be explained. Looking at the information in the report, Linley summarized, that is to say, Mo Pidong is suspected of absorbing black spiritual energy, and at the same time, because there is no black spiritual stone in the secret room, his organs are overloaded and he died accidentally? But this is not right. In this case, the movement of the remains should be a more obvious struggle. It shouldn't be a quiet meditation posture now, right? In clinical medicine, excessive adrenaline may cause other complications besides heart load. For example, tremors in the limbs, chest tightness, etc. Regardless of which of the above situations, most of them are a relatively continuous process and will not erupt instantly. That is to say, the human body must have a certain reaction time. Even if it is a sudden heart attack, you will have a short delay of covering your chest. This time may be very short, 5, 6, 7 or 8 seconds is possible, but it does exist. Except for special circumstances, there are really not many heart patients who die within half a second of the onset of the disease. What's more, Mo Pidong is a practitioner of the 5th level of the Jianden realm. For a strong man of this realm, even if the black spiritual energy has some other irreversible harms, in theory he should also make some struggling gestures. For example, leave a picture of the leader falling to the ground, and play a song of Hope Flower if the conditions are sufficient. But Mo Pidong's remains are not like this. His meditation posture is extremely peaceful. If it is changed to a more normal environment, It can even be described as feathering or transformation. Then Lin Li thought of something, pressed a button, and said to the assistant Zhang Guanghe outside the house, "Xiao Zhang, please ask the old master Wei to come." Zhang Guanghe's reply came quickly, "Understood." In the past period of time, Wei Fan was sent to the mainland to be the chief coach of the 50,000 local imperial guards, saving the capital for the psychic bullets needed for his Gatling gun. His father, Patriarch Wei, replaced him and came to the camp to be responsible for the training of the soldiers at the military base. Don't forget, there are quite a few local soldiers, and there are also more than 20,000 people who came to the Great Mo realm at the military base. Therefore, it didn't take long for Patriarch Wei to come to the headquarters. "Captain Lin, I heard that you have something to ask me." Lin Li asked him to sit down, and motioned Li Yan to pour tea, saying, "Yes, there is something I want to trouble you with." Patriarch Wei took the tea with both hands, and then sat upright, with a heroic look, and asked, "No problem, how do you want me to die this time? I just broke through the 4th level of foundation building a few days ago, and there is a chariot illusion that seems to be quite interesting." Lin Ziming, does this old patriarch seem to have misunderstood something? Then he coughed lightly and explained, "Old patriarch, you misunderstood. I invited you here mainly because I have a question to ask you, not because I need you to cooperate with me in acting." After Lin Li finished speaking, the expression on old Patriarch Wei's face became visibly strange. Fortunately, he was also a person who had been a patriarch, and being thick-skinned was a basic skill, so he quickly recovered his immortal appearance. "Captain Lin, if you have any doubts, just say it." Lin Li nodded, and then briefly introduced the matter of Mo Pidong's skeleton. "That's about the situation. So I would like to ask Patriarch Wei, when the practitioners of the Great Mo realm are practicing, will they encounter sudden changes but be unable to move?" Patriarch Wei stroked his beard, his eyes flickering. "Although it is inconvenient for practitioners to move around during ordinary retreats, if some accidents really happen, they will not be unable to move at all. I have seen Mo Pidong's skeleton with my own eyes. It was as if he died in his sleep, and it really didn't seem like he died of a sudden illness." Lin Li thought for a while and asked, "If ordinary retreats are impossible, then what about breaking through the realm? Isn't Mo Pidong a practitioner at the 5th level of the Jiandan realm? What if he is between the 5th level and the 6th level?" Patriarch Wei heard this and shook his head decisively, saying, "It is impossible for a cultivator to be possessed by a demon in a small realm. When I was young, there was an elder in my clan who was at the 6th level of foundation building. He was possessed by a demon when he broke through from the 6th level to the 7th level and unfortunately died. At that time, I once saw his remains, crawling on the ground with a hideous look, and his body was 7 or 8 meters away from the meditation cushion. There were also obvious signs of struggle around him. Therefore, theoretically speaking, it is indeed impossible for a cultivator to be unable to resist a serious illness during retreat." Patriarch Wei suddenly stopped talking, and his eyes flashed with a look of doubt, as if he had thought of something. After a long while, he said in an uncertain tone, "Captain Lin, if you talk about a situation where you can't resist external forces during retreat, I have really thought of a possibility. Note, our rabbit is more than 200 points away from upgrading to the 5th star. Everyone go and give it a thumbs up." Space, I saw a classmate's message asking me where to buy agarwood. This is a friendly price given by the author of a boutique group. There is no external sales channel. The market price is very high, hundreds of dollars per gram, so I can't give you any store links or sales agents. I just happen to have this experience and I'm talking about it. It's really useful. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.